This sitting is now resumed. Prior to the suspension, this honorable chamber was in debate in relation to the Appropriation Bill and the estimates 2019. We revert thus.
Standing Finance Committee.
I think you need to push all 11 feet of your arms.
Sorry, we have to take.
Oh, is that what you had? That isn't necessary. You had that? Oh, another on the other side?
The member from St. Lucie, honorable member, you don't want to speak anymore. She doesn't want to speak anymore. The honorable member for St. Philip South.
My question to the Attorney General, the Honorable Attorney General, is with regard to the 6 Rose area. We know that 6 Rose has now become a nucleus of activity. You have a very large fast food restaurant. You have the Princess Margaret Secondary School. You have a supermarket. As a matter of fact, there are 2 supermarkets. Then there's an open vending lot. Vending has become very popular in the area as well. There is the 6 Rose market, and in your preamble and in response to a question earlier, you did mention that 6 Rose would be a more suitable location for the location of a police station. But in the absence of a police station, without giving away too much in terms of national security, has any consideration been given to having a police outpost at 6 Rose, especially given the fact that there is also attracting heavy vehicular traffic as well as pedestrian traffic? Many constituents from both St. Philip North, South and West have been asking me to raise this matter and to get some sense of understanding the way the future looks like, what the future looks like in terms of security for the 6 Rose area by having a police presence, if not by way of a police station, the interim police outpost.
Minister, I'll permit the Commissioner of Police to respond.
Madam Chair, I would simply say that we have not determined that at this point that we need a post there, but I think it makes good sense to give some consideration to some outposts in that area. At this time, we have not had the kind of criminal outbreak as to suggest that it's immediate, but given the volume of traffic and activity in that area, it will be can be a good consideration.
My follow-up question will be that we've had, given the spate of criminal activity taking place, St. Philip South wasn't spared, and we've had 2 cases of gun violence in St. Philip South. which prompted the members of the community to ask the question. The other question that I was asked is how feasible would it be to have a greater police presence in areas like St. Martin's, Foul Bay, and indeed the surrounding districts of Harlington, and if there are any plans at all to increase police activity. I know, as the Honorable Attorney General said, we are not privy to giving away matters of national security, but some word that can bring some semblance of confidence to the constituents.
There is a police response to those areas. It is, given the shortages of resources, it is difficult to really create outposts in all of these areas. But there is indeed upscaling police activity in those areas.
If I can, by way of rejoinder, a lot of what the police are facing relates to our ability to deploy resources. There are a number of things that we would certainly want to see established, and I think that we have a model for small police outposts. I think the community, the society at large will know that at Christmas time there's a mobile unit that is located at Massey and Wowings, and the police have embarked on a project of partnering with the private sector to have containers, those shipping containers, converted into police outposts so that they can be moved from place to place as the need requires. So I think as perhaps not quite an offer, but I think you can fairly safely say to the Minister that by increasing the capacity to locate mobile facilities in different communities, it should allow for us to locate such a refurbished container in those Philippine areas should the need require it. Currently, we are focusing on the areas that we consider to be hotspots, and I think the Minister is fortunate, even though there have been some challenges in the St. Philip area, that we don't quite see it as a hotspot at this point. But mobile facilities, mobile containers are being outfitted so that they can be moved from location to location as the need arises. But please do bear in mind that a lot of the police activity is based not on luck and chance. A lot of it is intelligence driven, and I can assure the Minister that should the situation require it, based on information received by the police and how we deal with that intelligence, there will be many opportunities for us to increase the presence, both by patrols, but also, if needed, by way of a mobile facility.
Honorable Member for St. John.
Honorable AG, I have two questions for you. The Prime Minister touched on one earlier. In a news item this morning, it was mentioned that Trinidad and Tobago, they're using all of the technology. The drones, can you say how widespread these drones would be in use? Are you preparing to go to every police station? I would not ask the timelines, but just to find out if it is something that would be widespread.
Minister, let me say that it is unwise to disclose operational details to that nature of the acquisition of drones. Early in the debate, the police will be acquiring drones to aid them in law enforcement and crime prevention. The concept is not so new for us. At the time of Cricket World Cup, we invested in a blimp. And that blimp worked effectively to police all of the national events and so on by way of an airborne camera. So it isn't new to us. The difference is that everybody could see where the blink was. In this instance, we will be acquiring additional assets by way of drones, but I would not want to go into any greater detail in terms of numbers and so on.
My last question is related to bullet 3 of your strategic goals that speak to free legal service to persons of insufficient means. Can you expand on that, and how exactly would you be able to source this free legal service? If it is not only for criminal, this is under the strategic goals right at the very beginning.
Free legal services are provided, Minister, under the aegis of the Community Legal Services Department. That is the only model in Barbados which facilitates that. There is some discussion as to having other systems, but the Community Legal Services Department is the department that provides free legal services to Barbadians who are impecunious. They are varied. Every person who is charged with murder has a right to what we call legal aid. They need the additional offenses. I think where is the director? I think rape is one of those offenses. It also provides community legal services for custody matters. So there's a fairly wide variety of matters that would benefit from that. And I'll ask the director to go into a little bit more detail on the areas where community legal services assistance can be sought and obtained.
Good afternoon. My name is Bernadette John, and I'm the Director of Community Legal Services. The Community Legal Services Commission was established by statute, and in the statute, the first schedule provides all the areas that can be covered by legal aid, and there are 2 criteria. It's available for matters that come on the schedule or are referred by judges, and it is available to persons who cannot afford it. So we do a means interview. We don't have a means test. We do a means interview, and then it is available for any capital offense, manslaughter, infanticide, concealment of birth, for rape, all offenses where the person charged is a minor on the criminal side. On the civil side, for all family matters except divorce, again for matters involving minors, for tenantries and freehold purchase act matters, for constitutional law matters, and for writs of habeas corpus. Does that answer your question, Mr. Minister?
So, one last question, Madam Chair. And this is directed particularly at Ms. Willoughby, because I know when last we were in government, my department, which was the Ministry of Youth then, did a lot of work with your department in terms of the blocks. I just want to know what is happening now in your particular department as it relates to that kind of collaboration and the work that you were doing, because I have a lot of blocks still in St. John, so I'm just curious as to what is happening now.
Good evening, my name is Cheryl Wilby. I'm the Director of the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit. We continue to work with community leaders across Barbados. On March the 20th, we will be working with community police officers as well as officers from the Division of Youth Affairs in the area of Chapman Lane and those hot spots. And we will continue to dialogue to find out what are some of those resources that can be provided to ease this situation. We will continue in this financial year to work across Barbados. We continue to work with the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, and all the government departments to determine the best way forward to address crime at all levels. I know we would have worked worked together on several occasions looking at some of those programs that we can work together on. We continue to do so. My department, we coordinate, develop, and pilot crime prevention programs based on the evidence that we garner from our research. In that way, we continue to have evidence-based decision-making and planning within the department, and today it has been very effective. During this financial year, we have determined that we need to meet on a more intimate level with those departments and ministries that our research continue to unearth some critical areas for intervention. We will continue to do so in an intimate way, looking in a more strategic way to develop responses to some of the areas that we see in our system.
Thank you.
If I can, Minister, I've asked the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit to begin the work on establishing a strategic plan, a crime strategy for Barbados really, over the 3-year period 2019 to 2022. And that crime strategy, the unit has already begun to give some flesh to, and the whole idea behind it is that it will try to bring together all of the elements that go into strengthening our society. And I mentioned some of these earlier. Obviously, the immediate emphasis that people are looking for is law enforcement, but that cannot deal with everything alone. As I mentioned earlier, we have to look at reform strategies, we have to look at crime prevention strategies, and we also have to look at what long-term things support those strategies. So it's not even just a question of doing programming directed at the blocks. That is a specific focus, but I think you would agree that unless we also work on all of those things that feed into what can create a block culture, then we will be challenged. So the work of the unit is going to see the development of this crime strategy for Barbados 2019 to 2022, and I'm quite excited about what that will mean for us. You are aware that all of the social agencies are to work on their plan, but there has to be a golden thread that ties all of these initiatives together. And the strategy for Barbados 2019 to 2022 is what I anticipate would be that golden thread to tie together law enforcement and all of the other agencies and our communities into a proper strategy to arrest and hopefully minimize criminal activity in our country.
Thank you. I remember for St. Nicholas South.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My question is somewhat general, and then I have a follow-up question. Yesterday we held a meeting in the constituency of St. Michael South Central, and we were discussing the plastic ban, and a lady said to me after the meeting that her gutter was filled with plastics that she could clear during the heavy rains, but that she was afraid to go out because of this increase in criminal activity, and she didn't go out to treat her drains. I had the privilege of walking with the AG as well as the Commissioner of Police through Eden Lodge and Chapman Lane and Orleans, and people came up to me afterward and said, "You're a very brave man, to be walking through these areas." My question is that there is a general sense of panic in Barbados. There is a general sense that crime has now spiraled out of control. And my first question is, to what extent is that the truth? And what are we doing about it? One, in terms of actually dealing with the crime, but more importantly, in terms of alleviating the fears, founded or unfounded, that Barbadians have. That's the first one.
I'll ask Mrs. Willoughby to weigh in on the early part of the Minister's question.
Thank you. Currently, my department is conducting research to measure the extent and nature of fear across 6 high-risk communities. Right now, we are in possession of anecdotal information. We don't have anything scientific, but at the end of that study, we'll be able to provide a more accurate understanding of the level of fear of crime across those communities that we deem to be high crime communities.
And notwithstanding that work, I think, Minister, that your assessment is somewhat correct. I don't think that we would be truthful to ourselves if we buried our heads in the sand. Some communities across Barbados are feeling or are experiencing a paralysis that is hitherto unknown. You'd recall when we did our walkthrough in the Chapman Lane, Orleans area, that we would have been shown a particular street corner where there's a residence that is virtually riddled with bullet holes. And in another distance of maybe 15 feet, paling. Every Bajan knows a paling that had so many holes in it that you wondered if it was a sieve. These are the conditions under which some Barbadians are living, some law-abiding Barbadians are living in these at-risk areas. A lady in Eden Lodge said to me that when she gets in her house at 6 o'clock in the evening, as long as her last child gets home, her doors do not open until it's time to leave for work the next day. Now that level of paralysis in our communities is not only harmful, it is something that we simply cannot accept. Every Barbadian community knows what it's like to have a corner that people feel they can hang out on and talk, whether it's politics or whatever topical issue there is. The neighborhood shop is often the centerpiece of community activity, or churches. Neighbors being able to relate to each other normally, whether they're going to beg for something to eat or borrow a bag of flour or something. But then we have an environment not of their own making, where individuals feel that they have to stay in the house simply because that's the only way to be safe. Then we are really having an environment that is suffocating our communities. Now, whether we have empirical evidence of a high level of fear or not, the fact is that many communities in those at-risk areas feel exactly that way. Now, when a resident feels that she cannot go and clear a gutter, which is in itself something that you would expect a citizen to want to do, to spruce up and to maintain her own small community to prevent flooding, then that tells you that that is a community that is suffocating. One of the first things that we must do is to reassure those communities that we're on the job. If we don't reassure those communities that we are on the job, then those communities will not have a chance to breathe. And we can reassure those communities that we are on the job by virtue of such things as increasing the police presence, whether it is mobile patrols, whether it is community, through community policing, whatever avenues there are. But this is not just about stamping out crime. It is also and must also be about giving our societies and our communities a chance to breathe again, so that the average Barbadian can experience life living in fellowship and harmony with his or her neighbors as we know it used to be.
My follow-up question of sorts is for the Commissioner. Recently in St. Michael South, there was an incident where a young man was allegedly shot by the police in British Hill. And while I don't want to go into the specifics of the case or the right and wrongs of it, I I have a family that is grieving in British Hill, and they've told me that they're not getting the kind of information surrounding the case that they would like. So I want to know what's available in terms of engaging the public in these scenarios, one, for general information, but what recourse is available to a person who finds themselves in these kind of situations where they wish to challenge the series of events, perhaps as told by the police.
I let the Commissioner speak, but in relation to issues such as this, there is a police complaints authority, and that police complaints authority is established by law as the agency that is responsible for looking into any allegations of police misconduct. The current chairman of that entity is a retired judge of the High Court, someone who is impeccable in reputation and who was providing sterling service when she was a judge. And if that family feels that they have any particular grievance, then there are legal channels through which they can channel that. I wouldn't want to go into too much detail on that particular matter, though, for obvious reasons. In relation to what services might be available, across the entirety of government, there are counseling services available for individuals who may have the need to seek recourse to them. But I believe that this issue perhaps goes a little deeper than that. There's I suppose, an anger that people will experience when once these things arise, and we have to find a way as a society to work our way through them, ensuring that at all times we have respect for law. I've seen a number of very hostile, very, very bitter comments being made on social media, threatening all kinds of behavior towards the members of the Royal Barbados Police Force. That simply cannot be tolerated. There will always be an avenue for people to express their dissent, to say publicly as well that they do not agree. But when we go beyond that and start threatening the lives of the people who are sworn to protect and serve, then as a society we are reaching the point where anarchy will prevail. And I don't think that as an administration, certainly as an Attorney General, we certainly will not condone any misconduct on the part of anybody, but we will even less condone threats of violence against the law enforcement agencies of Barbados.
Before you continue, Member, just a question. What about, as in the case of, she's not a constituent, but her husband was inadvertently killed by a police officer some years ago. Up to this day, she's never had any kind of regrets. What challenges did she go through? Why did it take so long for somebody to actually look back at her?
I don't know the specifics.
You very soon, because she wrote letters recently.
Well, I'm saying I do not know the specifics of the matter you're referring to. I have in mind a particular instance, and I don't know if we are thinking about the same situation. There's currently a file that I've had the benefit of seeing, which looks into that particular issue, if it is the same person. But let me say this. Again, our society is one that is based on order, and that is both sides, that whether it is the police side or the citizen side. Every citizen of Barbados is entitled to recourse if they feel that there was some kind of misconduct on the part of the police force. I noticed you didn't say misconduct, you said inadvertently. Yeah. And that speaks to, as a lawyer, that speaks to a certain line of response. And I think that if the particular individual that individual should seek legal advice to see what recourse there is. And in fact, I believe if we're on the same instance, I think that that person already engaged a lawyer to represent her interests in the matter, and therefore, and I think a court case has already been filed, so I wouldn't want to say too much about that. But if the individual, we have an ombudsman in law. We have the individuals entitled to seek legal advice if they think that the police fell short of the mark of responsibility that they should have maintained. Then there's the Office of Professional Responsibility and the Police Complaints Authority that they can go to.
Yeah, well, just as a follow-up, AG and Commissioner, I certainly wouldn't encourage, support, validate any kind of disrespect to the police as well. But the question being a more general question in relation to where do they go, because this was a genuine expression of being ignorant to the system. And to whom do I go in a case where I have a grievance, a legitimate one perhaps, in relation to this? Who do I go to? Who is the person and how is it dealt with? And there's also the belief that a complaint to a police authority that is governed in many cases by police or people who support and represent the police will not give them the level of justice that perhaps they are seeking. And if there is on the cards an attempt perhaps to either reform, restructure, revise the current authority so that perhaps the public would feel more comfortable engaging in matters such as these. And this is really a legitimate fear that my constituents have.
The Police Complaints Authority is a body corporate that is established separately in law from the police force. The individuals can complain to the authority, and upon receiving the complaint, then the authority itself will investigate through their own officers. I accept that in this instance, and so given the practice, the investigations are done by members of the Royal Barbados Police Force, and that might be an opportunity for reform, and I can undertake that I will look at that and see what opportunities exist to reform that. But I want to assure the public that the Complaints Authority takes its job very seriously, and I think that the police force have in the past acted sternly enough against some of its own officers that the public should not feel that there is some idea that police are untouchable. A number of police, I think, have been charged with criminal offenses in the last year and a half to demonstrate that the police are operating impartially.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. James now.
Thank you, Chair. Honorable Attorney General, I commend you for the work that you have done so far in your capacity which you previously had. And my first intervention under this head would deal with the issue of our anti-corruption drive and your program speech towards the establishment of an integrity commission and an anti-corruption unit. The public of Barbados, as I believe we all know, and correctly so, concerned about the clear increase in corruption and corrupt practices under the last administration. And I think, to put it in layman's terms, the majority of Barbadians who have an interest in their country want blood. And of course, this government, in our manifesto, promised that we would bring integrity legislation, integrity in public life legislation on the first day we met as a parliament. We didn't do it on the first day, we did it on the second. And that bill is now in select committee of parliament. It's been there for a little while, and I'm just wondering if you can probably give the public an update as to where we are at in terms of bringing this legislation back before Parliament and getting it passed into the law of the land.
Thank you, Minister, for the opportunity to update the public on this issue. The resolve of the Barbados Labour Party administration to wrestle corruption to the ground is one that is firm and one that must not be doubted. Everyone will be aware, or the public should be aware, that the legislation was sent to select committee, so that the select committee, made up of both members of the Senate and members of this chamber, members of the other place and this chamber, that committee had the responsibility of looking at the legislation, inviting and receiving public comment and criticism, and arising out of that, try to see how the bill as presented to Parliament could be amended. We received a number of contributions. Many individuals appeared before us to give their views on the bill specifically and on corruption. That work, I'm able to say, was completed in before the end of October last year. But as Robert Burns said, the best laid plans of mice and men aft gang ugly. And though the committee worked steadfastly, we had some challenges in relation to the availability of manpower from the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel. Member for St. James North would recall that earlier in our presentation we talked about the kinds of challenges and the need to bring in consultants. This particular bill is being done by the Chief Parliamentary Counsel's office, but we had significant manpower challenges as a result of illness, really. And so that work has begun in earnest now, and I am committed to seeing it back in this chamber certainly within the next 2 to 3 months. I can say to you, though, that in anticipation of the bill being passed, the Office of the Attorney General expects to have financial provision made for it in the second part of this year. It's one thing to pass the law, but the institutional structures have to be put in place. But unfortunately, we can't put those institutional structures in place and provide financial resources for emoluments and so on until such time as we have the statute. To look at it another way, we could not make financial provision in these estimates for High Court judges until we had increased the number of judges. So following that same reasoning, we have to complete the legislative work before we can make the financial provision for it. But we expect that in the second half of this financial year, that entity will be up and running. There are, of course, though, a number of other things, Minister, if you don't mind, and I can avert to them within the 3 minutes I have left. This piece of legislation cannot stand alone. This piece of legislation has its own whistleblower provisions in it. But if we're going to seriously stamp out corruption, we have to build out the other legislative instruments that help to build that structure. And therefore, we're going to be enacting a separate piece of whistleblower legislation, which will be dealing with ensuring that individuals who give public interest declarations of misconduct, of corruption, have the benefit of the protection of law, so that they don't need to fear that by coming forward they would suffer reprisals. The Integrity in Public Life bill only deals with a schedule of individuals. So the whistleblower provisions in that bill will only deal with issues that touch and concern corruption on the part of any of those scheduled individuals. But you still have a raft of public and private sector entities and individuals who are quite capable of engaging in acts of corruption. So the larger whistleblower legislation will deal with that. And the other matter is the Anti-Corruption Act, passed in 1929 and not updated by any parliament since then. And the maximum fine for being found guilty of corruption under that statute is $2,500. Clearly a piece of legislation which, in terms of its skeleton, could still and would still work. But the notion of having a fine of $2,500, which might have made sense in 1929, still being applicable to an act of corruption today is absurd. So that piece of legislation needs to be updated, its fine structure needs to be updated, even the very language that it uses and the concepts that it enshrines need to be updated, and I give Parliament the assurance that with the will of Cabinet, we will see whistleblower legislation and also an updated piece of legislation targeting corruption, all within the next 4 to 6 months.
Two supplementary questions, Madam Chair. The first relates, well, to the fact, again, widely so, I think that our citizens are of the strong view that an individual who, in public life, who may be found to be corrupt should not keep the benefits or the assets which they acquired. And what are we doing in terms of asset recovery of assets obtained through bribery by public officials and other means?
Parliament on Friday evening the government laid in Parliament on Friday evening a piece of legislation which deals really with the confiscation of assets. Its name is the Money Laundering and Instrumentalities of Crime Act. And that piece of legislation will, when introduced, bring a new and more flexible framework to confiscation of assets. Madam Chair, there's no point in bringing prosecutions against individuals and allowing them to remain and to benefit from the proceeds of crime, to benefit from those ill-gotten gains. And therefore, we are bringing this new piece of legislation to deal with those issues. I can say to the Chamber that one of the noteworthy provisions, and it will be very new for Barbados, but it is found in other parts of the developed world, will be a few sections that deal with the question of unexplained assets. And members who have been following judicial pronouncements in England in the last 6 months would know that England had its first major case on unexplained assets and was able to seize many millions of pounds from an individual who had assets that she could not explain. Now, while a lot of that is unusual, in fact everything about it is unusual for Barbados because it puts the burden of proof on the individual, the simple fact is that one of the things about ill-gotten gains of crime is that they can be accounted for. Plain and simple. And the modern legal thinking is that if an individual has assets that he cannot account for, and I don't mean something trifling, it is the duty of those individuals to be able to explain appropriately to authorities where those assets came from. And if you can't, there's going to be a presumption that they're ill-gotten gains. Now, while you don't want to rationalize it down to the very minutiae, if somebody's mother or father died and left them a piece of property, that's a perfectly valid explanation. But on the other hand, if you are engaged in drugs and money laundering, and you have 5 and 6 high-end vehicles, but no job that anybody can point to, you have an obligation to say to the state, where did you get these assets from? Plain and simple. It is new for us, but the fact is that when it comes to the modern approach to law enforcement, we simply cannot allow people engaged in criminal conduct to be able to hold on to their ill-gotten gains. The other matter which I would like to mention briefly here is this. It is a modern trend that where assets are seized, that a large percentage of those assets are made available to law enforcement agencies to further carry out their work. So there will be double benefit for us in a situation where we are able to effectively seize assets. Then those assets are under our law, but also under a treaty that our Prime Minister signed with CARICOM this weekend. Those last week, those assets are able to be distributed across agencies, so the Royal Barbados Police Force will be able to get some impacts, which is the regional agency, will also be able to benefit from those resources. So it is a way really of taking ill-gotten gains and plowing them back into the matter of law enforcement.
Okay, especially for me, the Attorney General answered my second follow-up.
Thank you. Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to hear the Attorney General, or the Attorney General, address this particular matter. The last recent amendments to the Police Act constituted the occasion for much controversy. Amendments led by the former administration. I'm just wondering what is the honourable member's position with reference to those amendments, or the government's position, or both, in light of the change of administration. If I may just attach the other two questions, ma'am. The other thing has to do with morale in the Royal Barbados Police Force. That has been a very topical issue, suggesting that there's a low morale obtaining. I'd like to hear something said with reference to that. And then thirdly, I'm trying to remember what's the third. No, I'll give you the third. We hear from time to time reference made to the aspect of police operations that has to do with the use of warrants, search and entry warrants, and some concern has been expressed with reference to that matter. Street intelligence suggests, and I do not know that this is accurate, and I'm not accusing the police of anything, far be that from me, that the process perhaps is flawed or abused, in that warrants do not clearly identify those upon whom they're issued. They're improperly presented, and in fact, some of them are, I don't know if I should say predated or pre-done, issued by those who are responsible for ensuring the issue, and then used as occasion may require by police in the execution of their operations. Those three matters.
Yes. In relation to the Police Amendment Act of 2017, which was laid and debated in Parliament and passed by this last administration, let me reiterate that when that bill came to Parliament, the Barbados Labour Party in opposition at the time took exception to it. We took exception to it for two principal reasons. One, there was a total lack of consultation with the public. We had, as an opposition, had been very strident. I certainly spoke out stridently about the increase in firearm crimes and homicides and so on. But out of the blue, literally, the government passed a piece of legislation which, in our view, imposed measures that were somewhat draconian, We sought then to find out what was the factual matrix which laid the foundation for the passing of this law. Absolutely none came. I remind the Leader of the Opposition that on the 4th of February, the National Security Council briefed your good self and all parliamentarians on the national security situation, because we felt that as a parliamentarian you had a right to know what condition was facing the country, what were those things that threatened to destabilize us and to overturn the gains that we were making. There was no such discussion. In fact, to hear the former Prime Minister, people were still able to catch a bus and catch a bucket of water, and therefore everything was well with the world. There was absolutely no consultation, and the government of the day refused to take the people into its confidence. Now, if you have a matrix against which you can apply or relate a piece of legislation, then at least you can begin to have a sensible discussion about it. There was none. Secondly, we felt then, and we still do feel, that some of the powers that sought to be vested in the Royal Barbados Police Force by statute were draconian. We could not see at that time, and it would be fair to say the opposition has not changed, that the idea of cordoning off an entire community and establishing a curfew was appropriate in Barbados. That might be appropriate in Syria. That might be appropriate in many war-torn areas, but we did not feel that it was the right thing to do in Barbados in order to be able to achieve the legitimate ends of law enforcement. That position has not changed. It is clear, however, that we have to take a very strong approach to criminal activity in Barbados. And there are some things which I believe would have been lost in translation. My understanding from the members of the Royal Barbados Police Force is that it was never their interest, it was never their intention to shut down whole communities by putting up a barbed wire fence around them. My understanding is that they wanted to be able to secure adequately a crime scene. Now, if a crime scene takes place in a house, if a crime scene takes place in a particular area, they want to be able to secure it. They may not be able to complete the investigation over a 1 hour or 2 hour period. They may need to have it cordoned off for 2 days, maybe even 3 days, so as to be able to conduct the investigations. But I'm told that it was never their interest in cordoning off Chapman Lane and preventing people from coming in or going out and stopping them from exiting their house at 6 o'clock. My job as Attorney General is to ensure that people can leave their house after 6 o'clock, that we remove the monster of paralysis that is affecting our society. And therefore, to have a legally enforced paralysis is really not something that we're interested in. We have undertaken to do a review of that piece of legislation and to see what elements of it are capable of being salvaged and employed usefully and reasonably for the purpose of saving our society. And that is exactly what we're going to do. But whatever we can salvage, it will be salvaged on the basis that all of Barbados knows and understands what we are facing with, and it will be from a point of view that we take Barbadians into our confidence. The other element, of course, and I can't declare this as a matter of government policy, but it is well known to us, myself as the AG, the Prime Minister who served as AG, and in fact in Barbados as well at the time of Cricket World Cup, you can have something called sunset legislation. And sunset legislation simply allows, it establishes a mechanism where for a limited period of time, if instability exists to such an extent, you can pass a law which may be more, I don't want to say draconian, but it may require sterner steps to be taken by the law enforcement agencies. But it would be for a specific period of time so as to bring order and normalcy back. When that time passes, the legislation automatically falls away. We did that at Cricket World Cup, not that kind of sunset legislation, but other kinds of sunset legislation. And to the extent that as a legislative, as an executive, we ever feel the need to take extraordinary statutory positions, we would look carefully at the matter of putting laws in place for a specific period of time so as to enable us to deal with the problem at hand, wrestle it to the ground, and thereafter such laws would fall away. Your other issue, your other question related to the morals of the Royal Barbados Police Force. To the morale of the Royal Barbados. Did I say morals?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. For the benefit of the doubting listeners, the morals of the Royal Barbados Police Force are exemplary. However, the morale of the Royal Barbados Police Force is a whole other issue. Now, let me say this. Any diminution in the morale of the force that we have today did not start today. It did not start today. I venture that any lessening in the morale of the force would have started at the time when the last administration felt that it was their due to reach into the police force and to promote people who wore a particular color shirt and to discard those who did not. I venture that any diminution in the morale would have been given fuel then the Police Service Commission felt that they should disregard the promotion recommendations of the lawfully appointed Commissioner of Police in favor of the recommendations of his deputy. Such a thing is unheard of. Unheard of. That would be like you having a deputy leader of the opposition and you fire your senators. Couldn't happen. Well, that would be like the senators firing the leader of the opposition then. But that is what they did. Now imagine what that does to the leadership of a force. The leadership of a force is not one individual, you know. The leadership of a force is an entire amalgam of individuals, all of whom work together to secure the well-being of the force. Now, I have to assume that a commissioner who has the overall superintendence of a force, who is there every day, must know more about the kinds of skills he needs to promote than somebody who is not there every day. So how do you explain that a police service commission could determine that the recommendations of a police commissioner are to be disregarded and the recommendations of his deputy accepted? And the end result of that, a piece of litigation that continues up to today, that I'm now trying to see how we can get it settled. That brings low morale in the force. But if they did it once, and that was enough, perhaps you could forgive them. But they did it again. But this time perhaps it was worse, because at least on the last, when it was first done, they accepted the recommendation of somebody who at least was in the force. But the last time it was done, the current Commissioner of Police made recommendations for promotion, and they decided of their own accord who to promote. They disregarded his recommendations and decided who to promote based on their own personal knowledge and preferences. That is not the way to run an institution. So any lessening in morale has its origins in the last 10 years. And it is our duty to try and bring it out. Mr. Leader of the Opposition, there will always be people who are unhappy about how an organization is being run. Somebody will be vexed because they may get what they wanted. Somebody will be vexed because they feel that they were a police officer longer and should have been promoted faster. There will always be those kinds of things. But then you have an administration that adds to the day-to-day challenges of interpersonal relationships by embarking on this kind of glaring political interference. Then that is where the problem hits the fan, sir. I have always said that politicians politicize a lot of things. But agencies like the police force cannot be politicized. When a criminal assaults you or I, breaks into one of our homes, the police officer that shows up cannot ask you who you voted for the last election. He cannot ask you if you are B or D. Each of us is entitled to the benefit of the security that the police force provides. We must never politicize the police force. Never. I served previously as Attorney General. It might not have been for a long time, but still I served. At no time did I ever approach the Commissioner of Police and ask him to promote a single person, and I have reason to believe that neither of my two predecessors, the current leader of the opposition and the former Chief Justice sitting in the same chair, did not do it either. It is not how you run a modern professional agency, and any effort to politicize the force, whether from within or without, must be rejected out of hand. And on the final matter in relation to warrants, I would ask the Commissioner of Police to comment.
Madam Chair, on the issue of warrants, raised about warrants, there are built-in, we are governed by standards in the force that indicate how warrants are to be applied for and executed. And the standard determines that no lesser rank than the inspector should give that authority to apply for a warrant. So any sergeant, constable, station sergeant that finds it necessary to make application for a warrant must first seek the authority of the inspector or above so to do. If situations as suggested by the leader of the opposition do exist, that is cause for a complaint to be made to the police complaints authority or to the Royal Barbados Police Force to be investigated. But certainly there are built-in checks that would go to the heart of what you're complaining to ensure that it doesn't exist.
Just to be clear, Ma'am, I am not complaining. I am saying that there are some people out there who are complaining. I'm just asking for a brief on the matter.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. Philip West.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have two questions and one supplementary to the second one. AG, you mentioned some interesting statistics in terms of homicides and those involved with guns. One of the things that happens in societies all across the world is that when situations like these arise where you have increase in crime, people always look for scapegoats. Some points in times they would use the analogy that behavior is learned, and so therefore it is things like movies that are imported that make people do these things, or it's the internet, or in some cases, as I've heard on the roads recently, people talk about persons who have been deported back to Barbados as being heavily responsible for a lot of the things that are happening. I want to know from the Criminal Justice and Research Planning Unit if in your research, is there any significant data that can speak to this as being a true phenomenon, or is this just speculation on the part of those people who spoke this sort of notion?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. Our statistics at the department do not support that the crime that we are experiencing is perpetrated by returning persons from other jurisdictions. The majority of persons incarcerated for violent crimes are Barbadians between the ages of 19 and 25. We continue to grapple with that particular age cohort, not only with regard to crime, but substance abuse as well. So to date, we don't have any data to suggest that the crimes that are being committed are being perpetrated by persons returning to Barbados having committed crime in other jurisdictions.
Thank you very much. My second question was prompted really by the honorable member for St. George South when he spoke about persons going to prison based on child support, I believe it was. AG, you mentioned that it was not based on that, but that it was really contempt of court that these persons were sent to prison. My question is, again, for you and your team, in juvenile justice, there is the concept of divergence. And I'm wondering if divergence, where you try to keep children away from the courts for certain infractions, so to speak, is there a way are there any thought of putting any systems in place that would stop these, in most cases, young men from having to go to prison because of this very thing, and it's called contempt of court? Because in instances, you're asking some person sometimes who, somebody mentioned earlier, who do not have steady jobs, who are sometimes in cases do not have jobs at all, and cannot fulfill the mandate of the court in a proper manner, but yet they find themselves incarcerated. Is there any other thought of any other means of dealing with this particular problem?
Let me say that while there is a notion that vast amounts of deadbeat dads get sent up DODs, and I don't mean the alliteration for your amusement, we would first have to look to see whether or not there's a direct correlation between the numbers who are delinquent and the numbers who get sent to prison. I'd like to remind the chamber that contempt of court is and punishment therefore is reserved to the most to the worst of the worst, is reserved for the worst of the worst. So an individual who goes to the court and can't pay and explains to a judge, I can't pay, I've lost my job, this is the reason, it is most unlikely that such an individual would find themselves being sent up for contempt of court. In my experience as an attorney of some years standing, judges are really loath to send anyone up for contempt at all. I don't know if and it would have been good for me to have asked the question of the authorities, but I rather doubt that the Minister for Home Affairs, if he checked with the prison authorities, I rather doubt that he would tell us that the numbers of individuals populating the prison authorities for contempt would be a significant number. I don't know if he has that information. And then, of course, the other thing is that you're not sent up there for any long periods of time. You're sent up there as a punishment, and when the punishment is served, then you come back. So I'd like to distinguish, therefore, between an individual who is sent up to DODs for contempt of court and other individuals who make their way to prison. I think that the concept of divergence is one that is worthy of praise and should always be applied. And there are certain harsh realities that we have to face. If we send our young men up to prison, we are sending them at more likely an impressionable age, and to have them sitting up there rather on remand or having been convicted by way of sentence, to mix in with the criminal element, that hardened criminal element, you can be almost guaranteed that that individual will learn more in prison for however long he's there than he would have learned in the 4 years that he spent at school. So to the extent that it is possible to put other punishments in place for those individuals, we should. And that is why the penal reform legislation was passed some years ago, because it allows a judge to impose alternative sentences. So community service, and I understand I've got some recent reports that it's not working as well as it should, so we need to look at that, and I'll elaborate in a minute. But community service is a way of imposing a punishment on an offender while preventing them from going into the prison population. So those are the kinds of options that are available to the court. I will say, though, that I'm told, and I've asked to have it looked into, that in some places where individuals are sent to do community service, that they really go and cool out. So we have to make sure that community service is monitored properly, and that we get the benefit of what we get the benefit we intend. I am told by some individuals that there's a particular government agency that gets a lot of people on community service. But at this time of year, when they're working, they start at around 8 o'clock, but by 9:30 the work is finished. And because the individual on community service has to work alongside those individuals at 9:30, he go home too. So we really need to make sure that as an option, community service provides the benefits that we really need, and we don't just say that so-and-so will go to work at NCC or some other department like that. We need to make sure that they work so that they understand the importance of the punishment.
Thank you. Can I supplement your question? Yeah. So thank you, AG. And to this same matter, a number of persons, young men in particular, have asked me on a number of occasions if a scenario such as I'm going to describe, the things are the same for both men and women. So the question is, if there is a situation where, although they're rare, that the father or the family of a father are the ones maintaining and the child is living with them, does the same rule apply to the mother in having to provide financial support as it does to a father? And this is a question that people ask all the time.
The question is a resounding yes. Both in the magistrate's court and in the high court, a mother can be directed to pay maintenance.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honor the Speaker the progress of this matter and ask for a suspension, leave to sit again.
Yeah. Question is that I now report to Honorable Speaker progress and ask for leave to sit again. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All honorable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of the committee has reported progress and asks the leave to sit again.
Move that this sitting be suspended for 20 minutes. 10 minutes. 10 minutes.
10 minutes. The question is that this House be suspended for 10 minutes. All members in favor say aye. Those against say no. We think the ayes have it. This House is now suspended until 20 minutes to 4 o'clock.
This sitting is now resumed. Prior to the suspension, this Honorable Chamber was in Standing Finance Committee debating the estimates and the appropriation bill. We revert to that.
The Standing Finance Committee is resumed. We continue questioning with the Honourable Member from St. Philip South.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome.
My question is to the Honorable Attorney General. I recall you did mention about reform and what actually reforming police, was it Police Complaints Authority? And what immediately springs to mind is the whole question of having a chairman of the authority being a member of a political party who then, when having left the chair, went on to assume the office of General Secretary of the political party. My question is, what will be done in the future to ensure that such will not occur again? Because I'm acutely aware that this has become a very vexing issue in the public, particularly so because a number of officers felt that they were hard done when it came to promotions, etc. And if you can perhaps shed some light on the way forward to mitigate against such happening again in the future, and I will have a follow-up question.
Thank you, Minister. I think perhaps, though, that you don't mean the Police Complaints Authority. And on that assumption, I think what we're really talking about is the establishment of the Police Service Commission. That is correct. Thank you very much. With that clarification, Madam Chairman, the Police Service Commission is a body that is appointed under the Constitution by the Governor General. The individuals are appointed on the advice, however, of the Prime Minister. The issue raised by the previous speaker had to do with the chairman of the commission going on to become the General Secretary of the Democratic Labour Party. I regret that there's probably nothing that we could do to stop something like that from happening again. A person has freedom of association. Perhaps if it were the other way around, we may consider passing a law which says that a person with political affiliations could not serve. But that is a matter for further and sober consideration. Our challenge with the Police Service Commission, though, is this. The members of that commission are appointed pursuant to the Constitution, and they're appointed for a term of 3 years. Just before the election, the Prime Minister at the time wrote to the Leader of the Opposition and said that he proposed to reappoint the Commission for a further term of 3 years. The then Leader of the Opposition, current Prime Minister, had a very long discussion with me, and we felt that given the turmoil within the force, given the matter of the rejection of recommendations for appointment, given the very evident politicization of the force, we felt that we could not agree at all to the reappointment of a person whom we know to be wholly political. That individual, nothing personal, wants, threw his hat in the ring to run against me in St. Joseph. But as I said, nothing personal. he is now the General Secretary, but he wasn't at the time. But, you know, I have no doubt that there have been people who've been affiliated politically before, but this particular case is the exception that shows where the rule should lie. What has to happen, let me finish that particular thread. So we wrote, the Leader Opposition wrote to the Prime Minister to say that in the circumstances, the opposition could not agree to the reappointment of that particular individual. Notwithstanding our clear and unequivocal opposition to his reappointment, he was reappointed nonetheless. An administration changed on May 24th, 2018. An administration that secured every single seat in that general election. And then the issue of that particular commission resigning was put to them. They all refused and said that they have constitutional protection. Now, let me say that as far back as the 1990s, the Henry Ford Commission on Law and Order looked at the question of appointments in the police force and other disciplined agencies and made the recommendation at that time to the government that instead of having a police service commission, that we should have a protective services commission. A protective services commission that would deal with all of the promotion matters, all of the appointment matters, and things of that sort in relation not just to the police force, but in relation to all of the other protective agencies. The fire service, for example, and the prison service. And therefore, the direction that this administration intends to take the method of appointment of police officers is to establish a protective services commission, which then constituted under an amendment to the Constitution would deal not just with the police, but also would deal with all the other protective services. But in addition to that, through administrative arrangements, that commission will be given a full-time set of staff. The matter of promotions of the force taking a year. Individuals just received promotions, but they were recommended for promotion a year ago. People have been acting in post since January of 2018, but only promoted in January of 2019. All of these things have to be put into proper perspective and proper operation. But we can't do it with the ad hoc way that the existing service commission is operating. So we need to bring into being a protective services mechanism, taking on a whole raft of other institutions to the benefit of those institutions. But in order to be able to carry out that mandate, it will need a full-time person and a full-time secretariat to deal with it. Look at it this way. The prison service has, I think, about 900 prison officers. How many? 400. All right, 400. The Royal Barbados Police Force has a complement of around 1,200. The fire department, government security guards, a whole. When you add all of these individuals up, it is a complex staff to deal with promotions and appointments for all of them. And the fire service is done by the Ministry of the Public Service. So there's a disconnect because you have a disciplined agency that is being handled by a civilian organization, while the disciplined agency of the police force is not being properly dealt with. So while we will not be able to stop an individual from giving up a constitutional post and joining a political party, I would venture that then once this new Protective Services Commission comes into place, that we would see greater transparency, but also we would see the matter of promotions and appointments being dealt with greater alacrity that currently attends the arrangements.
Your follow-up?
Thank you, Honorable Attorney General. My next question is, and I believe that this matter has been made a political issue deliberately. And I speak to the appointment of the former Commissioner of Police serving as consultant to the Attorney General, where in the public this matter has been touted as the individual serving as a second Commissioner of Police, or one that is advising the current Commissioner of Police. I believe there's a lot of confusion over this matter, and perhaps if you can shed some light on the appointment and where the separations take place.
Thank you for your question, Minister. Let me say that the notion that Mr. Dottin, the former Commissioner of Police, has been engaged by me to come on board as another Commissioner of Police, to come on board as a watchdog for the current Commissioner of Police, to come on board to provide advice and assistance to the current Commissioner of Police is absurd. Nothing of the sort. But you see, those particular commentators have short memories. They have short memories. An individual who formerly headed the Financial Intelligence Unit and who resigned from that unit was brought back a few years later by the last administration as a consultant to that unit at a princely sum of 300,000 Barbados dollars. Let me repeat. A former head of the unit, the Financial Intelligence Unit, was brought back as a consultant to advise that unit for $300,000 by the same people who, for the project, by the same people who are now criticizing my decision to engage former Commissioner Dottin. Former Commissioner Dottin, like many other individuals in Barbados, have a wealth of experience. In January, when we recognized the difficult times that were ahead, the Prime Minister reached out, along with me, to three former commissioners, Commissioner Dottin, Commissioner Watson, and Commissioner Durant. And we said to each of them that we were going through difficult times, and that we felt that every single body had to put their shoulder to the wheel and try to help us through this issue by giving us their perspectives. Two of those three commissioners agreed. Those two commissioners, one sent a written memorandum and the other one attended that consultation. And that was the only context in which that particular set of discussions took place. However, I, as Attorney General, felt that given the nature of the issues that I have to grapple with as Attorney General, some of which are associated with law enforcement directly, but others not, that it would serve the ends of this country well if I had additional support by way of a consultant to bring to bear to all that I have to do his particular expertise. Plain and simple. Former Commissioner Dottin is not here to advise the Commissioner. The Commissioner has my confidence, and I am satisfied that he's doing his work as he should. However, there are a number of policy issues that we have to grapple with and grapple with urgently. It is not known to members of this chamber that Barbados is being threatened by a downgrade in relation to human trafficking. Human trafficking. Now, we have to meet certain standards in relation to human trafficking. But if I ask the average Barbadian, what is the experience of human trafficking in Barbados, they would say to you, well, I really know what you're talking about. But we have very tight timelines in relation to human trafficking that we have to meet. But we have a force that I've already explained is challenged with numbers. They have already given up 2 days a week so as to be able to discharge the responsibility that they have to discharge to keeping this country safe. I cannot afford to take the commissioner and his senior staff off of that burning day-to-day job to help to carry the human trafficking load. I can't. And then there are other policy issues that are associated with keeping our communities safe. There are policy issues that are related to corruption and anti-terrorism and so on. But I cannot take the commissioner and his staff away from their day-to-day job to handle those. Now let us get real. Let us get real. When I became Attorney General, I asked my permanent secretary if she could be so kind as to give me a brief on the projects that the special advisor to the then Attorney General was doing. An individual who had been in the post of special advisor for about 10 years. The permanent secretary, and she's sitting to my right, said to me, "Minister, I cannot tell you what he was doing. I do not know. I never saw anything that he was dealing with. But a gentleman, a special advisor to the then Attorney General, came to work every day for 10 years. And nowhere in the Ministry of the Attorney General can you find a piece of paper that you can attribute to that officer in return for a decade of paychecks. A decade of paychecks. But we are looking to put in place urgent solutions to urgent problems, and I could hear them squeaking about consultants. I believe that at the appropriate time, the minister responsible for finance, who has the oversight of all of government spending, will be able to say to this chamber how many consultants the last administration had. The number is vast. But she will also be able to say what were the deliverables. That number is minute. Mr. Dottin has already put his shoulder to the wheel. I've already seen the benefits of what he's been asked to do, and I do not think that any right-thinking Barbadian would say to me that because of some idea that he was the former commissioner of police and so on, that I should not seek to engage him in helping us to wrestle this problem to the ground.
Just one final observation. I really would have loved to have heard the Honorable Attorney General touch on it in his response, so I'll ask it so that we can get clarity in the public. There have been a school of thought that there are some eminent persons who would have served as Commissioner of Police as well. And one that comes to mind readily is Oliver Durant. The public has mentioned that perhaps he could have been considered, and why Dottin and not Durant? You may want to shed some light on the process.
Well, I don't want to say why A and not B, but let me say that former Commissioner Durant did respond to our request for his advice and by a written memorandum. But the fact of the matter is that former Commissioner Durant is not in the best of health, and I wish him well. But you know, at the end of the day, it came down to that choice that I had to make. And I still feel that it is open to us to press every single Bajan into service to help us to deal with the issue. It was my choice, but to say that it was either Commissioner Durant or Commissioner Watson or Commissioner Dottin really is to engage in a farcical exercise. All of them are eminent Barbadians, and if I had 10 to choose from, I'd be very glad if I could get all 10 to help me to wrestle this problem to the ground.
Thank you. Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Not to delay proceedings too much, I'd like to
thank the Attorney General for his very comprehensive presentation today thus far. But I'd like to get a little more information, if we may. I think that he is aware that given the fiscal situation, given the current financial and economic situation of government, that it would be difficult for us not to maximize the utilization of our physical resources where we have them. And while we've agreed to expand both on, and these estimates are significant in that they do so, with the creation of both additional criminal courts and a dedicated commercial court, that we have to introduce some changes in how we do business in order to be able to better utilize physical plant that we have invested tens of millions of dollars in, and not to add additional costs of rental or purchase of buildings or property for. Perhaps the Attorney General might explain to the Honourable Chamber how he intends to accommodate the additional criminal courts and the commercial court, if he hasn't done so already. And if he does, I apologize because I was in and out of the floor. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Prime Minister. The matter of how we use resources, especially physical plant, is always a vexed question for a country like Barbados. And you know, everybody wants to have a nice new building to move into. Everybody wants to have their own facility that is theirs. But there are some obvious challenges that we have. A courtroom is no less a courtroom after 4:30 in the evenings. All of the infrastructure that is in place, whether that is transcription equipment, recording equipment, computer equipment, all of it is still there. Now, we are introducing additional courts and additional judges. And while I would love to be able to say that we could have a further physical plant to accommodate these additional functions, the reality is that we simply cannot afford to. Some of our courtrooms close at 1:30, 2 o'clock, and are not opened again until the next day. Simple as that. Some of our courtrooms may be used for only 4 hours in a day. Now, and the same thing can be said for our schools, Prime Minister, and many of the installations that government invests large amounts of money in. And therefore, the Ministry of the Attorney General proposes that some of our courts will now have to sit in the evenings. Now, let us not start to scream and shout. There are many lawyers who will tell you that they are at 7 o'clock in the night, they are still at court. So it can't be that judges don't work late or can't work late, or that lawyers don't work late or can't work late. We accept that there are certain kinds of matters that would not be amenable to work late into the hours on evenings. Madam Chair, you could imagine a person on jury duty. If you think about it, the person who is on jury duty is now expected to go to work. But what would happen if that individual has to do a jury trial from 4:30? Is it that they will go to work in the morning and then in the exhausted state show up to do jury duty? And would they be entirely safe leaving the court compound at 8 o'clock to make their way home? Some of them who might have to, the very people who they sit in judgment over might be headed to the same bus stand as them. Those are the kinds of issues that you face. So criminal matters done in the assizes would not really be amenable to that kind of extension. However, there's no reason why civil matters could not be heard in the afternoon. We think it would be a positive thing. It would ensure that our equipment, that our plant is used effectively. And what would it cost us? Nothing more than ensuring that we have staff available to service the court. Plain and simple. And what is that staff? A court marshal to ensure duty, to ensure order in the courtroom. Counsel will show up. You don't really need anything from the registry, so to the extent that you do, I'm sure we can come to to some kind of skeletal staff arrangement there. It is something that has to be discussed with the social partnership, but I can tell you that we've already broached the subject with the social partnership, and the social partnership by and large recognizes that we need these additional courts, but we don't have the fiscal space to build new installations. I will admit to the chamber that we had looked at one of the buildings that is currently vested in Res New Life or something like that. One of the former Clico buildings that is right next to the court. But that particular facility, when it was first looked at as an alternative location to relocate the court with the environmental problems, it would have taken a significant amount of money to put it into use. And we are facing difficult economic times. So while we are putting the additional courts in place and so on, we have to be a little flexible and look to deal with courts in the evening. I've already had a discussion with the Chief Justice, who tells me that sitting late in the evening was very familiar to him when he worked as a judicial officer in New York. And I don't make the point because the chief could sit late, but I make the point that it was in New York, and that other territories are taking innovative options to hand to try to ensure that we can deliver justice as it needs to be delivered. And certainly I fully support a number of our courts meeting in the evenings, and given the nature of the work that some of our specialized courts have to do, an evening is a perfect solution for them. Thank you for steering me in that direction, Prime Minister.
Thank you.
Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to ask a question to the Learned Attorney General or to one of his members of a member of his team. This relates particularly, and I'm making the assumption that it was not asked while it was out of the chamber at another meeting. I'm looking at subhead 256 of Police Service, the program 244. This has to do with general police services. Now, we have heard, based on the recent, I don't want to use the word surge because we're getting different words. The recent gun crime is probably the phrase I should use. And I've heard, I think it was the Learned Attorney General, or maybe the Prime Minister, who indicated that guns don't swim or drop out of the sky. They're coming through ports of entry. And my question to the Attorney General is based on the fact, and I'm speaking cognizant of the reality that I'm Minister of Labor, and one of the early obstructions or areas of opposition to cameras in the port came from workers' representatives. So I'm conscious of that, but I'm asking the Attorney General if there are going to be any procedures put in place, because I think Barbados generally accepts that firearms are coming through our ports of entry. Are there going to be any structures, procedures put in place that will allow the residents in Boscobel and Indian Grumman, Spikestown, and Malna to sleep any more comfortably, knowing that we're doing something to stem the flow of firearms into the country? Because while no area yet in St. Peter has been identified as a trouble area, we live in a very small country, and no place is safe, whether it is in the country or in the town, gated or open villages like Rosehill where I live. And so all of us are concerned about firearms, and I just want to find out from him if there are any plans to put processes or procedures in place to address the importation or maybe I should use the word arrival into Barbados of firearms.
Thank you very much, Minister. Last year, and for a number of years prior to last year, 94% of all of the containers coming into the port left the port without having been scanned. 94% left the port without having been scanned. 94%. So in other words, of all of the 30,000 containers that move through our port every year, only 6% of them are scanned. At one point in time last year, none of them were scanned. The year before, none of them were scanned. Now, the way in which police and customs, and this underscores the importance of our decision to keep customs as a border control agency. They examine containers and barrels and so on, whatever kind of container, I suppose, goods are shipped in. They sometimes operate on the basis of intelligence. But the fact is that any modern port has to have a high percentage of containers scanned for firearms. Criminals are innovative. They are breaking down firearms and concealing them on the insides of engines. They're hollowing out logs, putting them in that. They're putting them in TV sets. They're putting them in fridges. Anything at all to try to avoid detection. But the human eye will not necessarily detect when a fridge has been taken apart and guns concealed and put back together. So the only way that you can effectively deal with these things is to have them scanned through technology. For years, we only had 2 scanners, and for years, only 1 scanner was working. And as I said, at one point in time last year, no scanners were working. Now, there was a recent drug bust. Individuals have been charged. I think it's a vast quantity. I think it's over 900 bricks of marijuana, 900 bricks of cocaine, 900 bricks of marijuana and about 20-something bricks of cocaine were discovered in a container outside the port. So that container had not been scanned either. Now, we have, as I've said already, we have determined that the first call on our resources is law and order, safety and security. And therefore, recognizing that that is an unsatisfactory statistic, that 94% of containers can go through our port without being scanned by equipment that is intended to pick up firearms and other contraband, we have directed the port to immediately purchase a second scanner. And I think that second scanner should be here by June, July? Yes? And a third scanner is also being purchased, because you have to factor in occasions where you have larger than number quantities of goods coming in, and you also have to factor in some downtime. Now, the Port of Kingston scans 100% of containers that passes through it. 100%. And the Port of Bridgetown scans 6%. Now, that is really not on. So your question is, what are the measures that we're putting in place? We're making the investment. Now, they're not cheap. Scanners are not searchlights. They cost many, many millions of dollars. But what is the cost of not making the investment to communities like yours in Rose Hill, or in Bathsheba, or in Clifton Hill, Shepherd Hall? You remember Mr. Lucy had to get in on this one. What is the cost of not doing it? So I can say to you that we're going to be making the investment in these things. But I also feel I need to mention that for some time, and the Commissioner spoke about it publicly on many occasions before now, before this administration, he spoke about the disconnect and the absence of arrangements and relationships between the customs officers, between the Customs Department and the police force. For the first time since we were last in government, the Customs Department and the Police Department have now signed a memorandum of understanding to clearly delineate each other's roles, what their rights and obligations are, and what the expectations of each of them are, so as to bring structure to exactly who does what and when. And I cannot tell you how valuable a tool that is. When we were last in government, they operated on the basis of a memorandum of understanding so that there was no doubt as to who had authority. There was no doubt as to how far the police were expected to go and what the Customs Department had to do. But we've now put that MOU back in place so as to bring certainty to the arrangements and also a new spirit of cooperation and collaboration between the two agencies. The other matter relates to cameras. There's a greater need for monitoring of all of the areas of the port so as to prevent leakage and the smuggling in and out of contraband. And cameras are going to go a long way in order to reduce that. And the port has agreed to, and I think the tender is probably, if it's not out yet, it's about to go out, has agreed, so that we will have virtually universal coverage of all areas at customs. And I have to say that on this occasion, there's no pushback. On this occasion, there's no pushback from anybody in relation to the full coverage of the port with cameras. It is a must, and we're making the investment for it. I believe there's never going to be a foolproof system, but I believe that the measures that we're putting in place will certainly go a long way towards ensuring that the port is not the poorest place that it has been operating as. One of the things that we've had to do is to reduce the number of containers that get allocated. I think the number is green. So there are some companies, their containers are always green. So there are a number of things, some of which I can't go into, but everybody who comes under the microscope is going to be checked, and there is no businessman who is to feel that he and his goods are inviolate. There is no entrepreneur who is to feel that he and his goods are inviolate. The only thing that is inviolate are the people and places of Barbados.
A follow-up question, Mr. Attorney General. You mentioned camera coverage across all areas. Every now and then somebody seeks to shock my innocence. And I've heard from a former employee actually, that there are sometimes people who operate in the water at night. Now, not going into any more detail on that, my question would be, the coverage that you speak of, are you including, assuming that what was said to me is correct, are you having any procedures in place to try to counteract what may be happening on the boat in the dead of night?
Full coverage of the port is full coverage of the port.
Okay.
Let there be no doubt. There will be no blind spots.
Thank you. Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much. Let me begin this time by complimenting, and sincerely so, my honourable friend from Parish of St. Joseph, constituency of St. Joseph, and his team particularly so CPC chambers. I think an inordinately impressive number of pieces of legislation have come to this Parliament in short order, which must surely represent very hard work and devoted commitment, especially bearing in mind the urgency of the moment which this government has been stressing with reference to some of them. Not only have they come quickly, but important bits of legislation on planning, on the management of public finances in Barbados, with reference to international business companies and domestic corporations, and integrity legislation. These things are very important, fully, in my view, revolutionary, and they have been brought here in a situation of time pressure, or pressure with reference to time. My question is, what else is coming that is of that type of significance? How do these estimates suggest that shortly perhaps we will see legislation relative to a contractor general in Barbados, legislation relative to electoral reform, campaign finance laws? These things are extremely important, and some of these pieces of legislation are intricately connected to each other, and one is not worth the paper on which it appears unless it is accompanied by some others. So what's the time frame, and what indications can government speak to today with reference to that particular type of timetable? A question along with that as well is how much recourse has had to be made to private services to help you to accomplish the tasks that you have achieved to date? These estimates suggest you're going to be spending perhaps $500,000 more the next financial year with respect to professional services related to drafting, etc. Are you satisfied with the complement of staff that you have? Is there an over-reliance on private services, or are we in a good position vis-a-vis using both of those sources to get the job done? But I compliment the Honorable Attorney General and his team.
Perhaps I can start with your second question first. Let me assure, well, I'm grateful for your kind remarks about the staff at the Chief Parliamentary Council. Lest the other members of the AG's chambers feel that they are not as important, let me compliment all of them, whether SGs or CPCs. You know, they're doing a good job with difficult circumstances and short on resources. The CPC's office especially so. I can tell you that on the occasions when I have had to have recourse to outside professional services for drafting, the CPC has been consulted on in every instance. So the decision to go out to get additional resources for drafting is a decision made in concert with her. Well, perhaps the decision is ultimately mine, but it is not taken without regard to her. And in fact, she has even been involved in the selection of the individual whose drafting services we have engaged, because there's no point me foisting a draft person on the chambers where the style and there's no chemistry. This has to work, because even though a private individual will do the drafting, it still then has to go to the Chief Parliamentary Council for her final sign-off before they request my certificate. And on the instances where we have used private contracting services, they have had available to them somebody from the CPC's office to help to make that adjustment and that transition. The amount of $450,000 which you see here is, I hope it will be sufficient to get our parliamentary agenda going. The fact is that there's a shortage of draftspersons across the world. So important is the office of draftsman that in England, when an individual is appointed to be Chief Parliamentary Counsel, a knighthood is invariably conferred upon them. No joke. In England, when you get appointed Chief Parliamentary Counsel, a knighthood comes along with it. All across the Commonwealth, there is a dearth of drafting services. I had meetings with the Commonwealth Secretary with a view to having resources made available to Barbados for drafting, and the Secretary said, we don't have any. In fact, we want such resources for other states. We are privileged to have a former Chief Parliamentary Counsel himself, who is now a retired judge, Mr. Justice Sherman Moore, a retired judge of appeal and former Chief Parliamentary Counsel. Mr. Justice Sherman Moore drafted seminal pieces of legislation, all of our defense legislation. His intellect and his drafting skills are renowned. And we're very fortunate to have him available to us together with one or two other individuals. So, in answer to your question, I believe that this is a reasonable pre-estimate for the amount of drafting services that we will need to buy in. I cannot say to you that it will be sufficient. Drafting services are paid for essentially by the hour. When we had to do the drafting project in December, it took over 200 hours to be able to get that work done in such a short space of time. But I believe this is a reasonable pre-estimate, bearing in mind the pieces of legislation that we have to look at. There are a number of pieces that are, as they say, in the pipeline. The CPC carries out the drafting requests of all of the ministries represented on the front bench, all of them. So from one week to the other, the CPC may be working on agriculture, they may be working on housing legislation, they may be working on legislation for sanitary and phytosanitary measures, standards, all kinds of things. And we only have, I think it is 9 individuals. And in order to be able to draft, you have to effectively immerse yourself in the subject area. There's no way to do it otherwise. If you want to draft effectively, you have to have a firm grasp of the issues that you're drafting. And just imagine what that does to individuals who are drafting major pieces of legislation to fit government's policy over a very short period of time. I cannot tell you what is coming next. I can tell you that the government's legislative agenda is vast, some of it purely policy-driven. We've inherited from the last administration. And before we make a determination as to which of those policies we have to follow, we have to decide whether we want to keep those policy standpoints, whether we want to change anything, and if we want to change, what it is that we intend to change. That is what we're called on to do, and we will so advise the Chief Parliamentary Counsel. But I can assure the member that the Office of Chief Parliamentary Counsel is busy and will continue to be busy, and I expect that in the short and long term, we will have to bring in outside services.
Thank you. Honourable Member for Christchurch East, your card is so high I almost miss you. You may pose your question.
Attorney General, the Supreme Court has been closed for quite a while for renovations and remedial work. Is there some indication as to when we can expect that court to reopen and for business to resume as usual?
The short answer is that I anticipate that the move back to the home of the Supreme Court of Judicature of Barbados will be completed by the 1st of April 2019, and by the 1st of April 2019, or I should say on or before that date, normal service will have been resumed at that location. The amount of work that had to be done on the existing building has been well, fairly significant. We've had to completely change, I don't remember the technical term for it, but there's a covering of the roof. You remember that a lot of what affected the functioning of the court there was environmental difficulty, not structural, environmental. And that had to do with moisture, which in turn was a result of poorly functioning air conditioning equipment and also poorly functioning sealant on the roof. It was originally estimated that the cost of obtaining and applying the new sealant to the roof would have been about $900,000. It turned out to be in the region of $1.8 million. And of course, when all the old stuff was stripped off, other challenges were found. At this point, all of that structural work is finished, and we took the opportunity to build an additional number of courtrooms in the facility so as to be able to accommodate some of the additional judges that we're bringing on board. The fumigation of the registry is complete. The fumigation of the registry is complete. You remember, Madam Chair, that we're dealing with mold and that kind of thing. So we've had to fumigate the registry. I expect that the fumigation of the other building, it isn't something that's well known, but the Supreme Court building is actually two physical buildings that are connected by or separated by a very, very narrow seam. And in fact, one of the things that we discovered was that the material that sealed off that seam had also completely disintegrated, and moisture was getting down into there. So that also had to be done. But the Supreme Court is now to be done. And Ms. King? Yes, please. The Supreme Court is now to be fumigated and cleaned. And then, of course, we have to look to the matter of the relocation from Warrens back down to White Park Road. So we've had to make extraordinary provision, I think, for about almost $500,000 to do a full cleaning of the entire White Park Road facility, and that's going to be completed in very short order. There are some things, though, that I think we just have not been paying too much attention to. We've got a report from the scientists that the fabric-covered furniture has provided a haven for mold. And therefore, we have such furniture that's fabric-covered that can be taken back to the court, has to be cleaned properly, but some of it is also going to have to be disposed of because of the extent of the infection, of the infestation. All of the files that are currently stored have to be cleaned before they can be put back into the building. The files that are at Warrens have to be cleaned again before they can be brought back down to White Park Road. But at this point, I think we are on stream, and therefore we'll be moving back into and have a fully functioning court back at White Park Road by 1st of April.
Madam Chair, Attorney General again. Some of the delays with the court system, AG, have had to do with the reluctance on the part of some judges to give decisions or give decisions in a timely manner. Actually, it goes down to the magistrate's court as well, where when we would have started practicing, you before me, but when we would have started practicing law, in those days when a case was finished in magistrate's court, you got the decision pretty much on the spot. And a written decision was only tendered if an appeal was given. There seems to be a reluctance to make quick decisions even when the facts and the law are obvious and are interlocutory matters. So I appreciate the fact that we're getting brand new court again, but if we go back into the brand new court with the same old attitudes, we're not going to get very far. I just want to know if there's anything in place in your budget and your estimates to facilitate some continued education for the judicial officers, especially in the area of decision-making and judgment writing.
Thank you for your question. Those matters don't, and I know it may seem curious, don't really fall under the estimates of the Attorney General, but rather they fall under the estimates for the Cabinet Office. But I can assure the Honourable Member that all of our judges receive training. In fact, continuing education of the members of the bench has always been important, and I am able to say that our judges receive specialist training in many areas, including such things as writing of judgments and so on. Now, I have to say that when we moved from the old Coleridge Street facility to the court at White Park Road, we brought with us a tremendous amount of enthusiasm, judicial assistance, use of technology. By then we had transcription services in place, and I think that on paper at least we had all the makings of a system that could work well and efficiently. But that is on paper. The brutal reality is that the delays in giving decisions seem now to be worse than ever, certainly worse than when we had 5 judges operating both High Court, Divisional Court, and Court of Appeal. All 5 judges did the same thing. We've set up a dedicated Court of Appeal so as to be able to relieve judges of having to do those kinds of things. But it hasn't quite given us the results that we'd want. I believe that the numbers of cases that have been filed are not necessarily the beginning and end of the story, because certainly evidence shows that there was a small decline in the number of cases in the last few years. We have to make sure that the judges have the resources that they need, and I think that we're doing a good job in that regard. But we're also going to have to call on judges to deliver their decisions in a timely fashion. But I'd like to ask the registrar if she'd like to weigh in on this subject.
Thank you, Honorable Attorney General. We do have delays in the system, not only in judgments, but also in the trial period, and stakeholders all have to take blame for that, not just the judiciary. In respect of delivery of judgments, the judges have 1 day a week, which is called a reading day.
Sorry, could you sit forward a little bit? I don't think it will go up.
Okay, thanks. Yes. The judges have 1 day a week, which is called a reading day, to prepare themselves, their decisions. What they have been doing actually is using that day for trials. Their dockets are so full that they're not taking it for reading, actually doing trials on those days. So it's obviously backing up on them in that regard. So that must have to be taught as to how they actually use that reading day, not for trial, but actually to do their decisions. Judicial assistants are of great assistance and importance to the system in doing the research for the judges who would then use that to form their decisions. 1 judicial assistant serves 2 judges, so you can understand the workload of that person. Continue? Yes. So what we're looking at is making sure judges actually use that reading day for trials, 1. 2, we're happy to have on board new judges come in. We thank the Honorable Attorney General and Prime Minister for that, to help alleviate the weight of 1 judge doing all of the matters, which are like family, civil, trials, commercial, all in 1 week, and not have any time to do their decisions. The Chief Justice as well is on board in making sure that they have time to do their decisions, and looking at rostering persons to have a short period off to do their decisions. So things are afoot to see if we can reduce the level of decisions that are outstanding, and we hope that it will improve as the year goes on.
I guess this is probably this is more probably directed to you, Madam Registrar. Madam Registrar, what is happening or what is being done to speed up things in the registry, the processes in the registry, the 10 minutes of getting back certificates, decree absolutes, the processing of urgent applications? What is being done to speed up things in the registry? The whole judicial system really needs an overhaul, and I think the support services also need to come up to speed so that they can provide the adequate support for the system when it gets on its feet.
IT driven as a way to improve our service to the public and to the lawyers. If you look at the record section, we are looking at having a record system in place that would allow us to be more effective in having those certificates on time, birth, death, and marriage, etc. The system would have crashed some time ago. We managed to save some of the data, but we're still quite manual. We have looked at other systems to see which one we should engage, and we found one which had cost $1.4 million US. We went to the Ministry of Economic Affairs to get a grant because we were prudent with our money, and the grant was okayed by Dubai. It was coming from Dubai. But for some reason that fell through. We weren't a priority on the list anymore. Apparently some persons had applied to have a study tour of Dubai, and that was his priority compared to us. So that fell through. We have put money in the estimates to assist us, not a lot, because we're hoping we'll get that grant to go forward with the record system being improved, and that is happening as we speak, make it automated fully again. At our present location, we have some difficulty because we don't have a vault that keep all the ledgers with the information on births and deaths and so on. So there's a delay in getting that information, having to go to the vault and still be at the registry to deal with the public. And also we've lost a quarter of the staff and records due to the retrenchment. So everything has slowed down in that regard. And once we automate it again, it will not have an impact. But right now it's having a great impact on the public, waiting that period to collect those certificates. So not having the manpower is a great issue for us. In respect of the High Court, we have a system called GEMS. It's quite old, and it doesn't carry us to the future where we would like to go. It's not web-based, can't be done online. We're looking at improving that by having the Apex Curious system, which the Caribbean Court of Justice use. That is our ultimate appellate court. We've done the same platform as them, which is a good thing. And the access is 24/7. You can do it from your office. Instead of coming in to stand in line before the legal assistance apply, you can do it through electronically. We have to amend our laws so that you don't have to swear after before the court. You can actually have a written statement verifying the truth of it and then mail that as well. So all of this would happen in the new financial year to actually expedite the matters before the court.
Members in Local Southeast.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question, Attorney General, is specific to the issue of children and certainly students in the system who find themselves engaging the attention of the police. Children and students, whether they're in school and they find themselves engaged in activities which require the intervention of the Royal Barbados Police Force. My question, therefore, is in relation to what steps are being taken presently in relation to interviewing children as witnesses and the follow-up that is required, particularly as it relates to interviewing techniques. Is there a specific or dedicated set of resources that is being utilized or intended to be utilized to be able to train police to deal with child witnesses at this present time? And if not, I'm sure you will give me the assurance that it will be done at some point in the near future.
I would absolutely give you the assurance, but I'll ask the Commissioner if he could comment.
Madam Chair. Yes, principally, we work through the juvenile liaison scheme to deal with at-risk children. As you know, that's a program that is voluntary in that the parents and the children have to volunteer to be part of it. Several children are referred to that department through, especially through principals from schools. You're seeing more and more of that. But the officers who work in that department have special training in that area, and they also have assistance from experts in relation to dealing with those young people.
guideline or policy which is governing the officers in relation to the handling of these children. And specifically, my other intervention would be in relation to children who are special needs related. Is there specific training in that area in terms of the amount of times children are interviewed? Certainly, how soon after an offense is committed that the individual is interviewed, whether by juvenile liaison or in conjunction with the police. Because I did have a case recently, and that's why I'm also raising it in relation to the speed at which the Royal Barbados Police Force would intervene in those matters once reported. The Ministry of Education obviously can take steps from its end in relation to any alleged offences in relation to suspension, but the follow-up obviously will have to come from the Royal Barbados Police Force once that report is made. So I'm curious as to, are there specific guidelines in place to deal with not just students alone, but in relation to students who are special needs and exhibit certain specific requirements for interviewing techniques?
As it stands, the system, we don't have anything in place for special needs children. Other than that, we would engage professionals in that area to support the interviewing and so forth in relation to those children.
My other question also would be in relation to the same issue, also recovery of weapons or suspected weapons. In relation to corporal punishment, as you know, the law provides for principals to administer corporal punishment presently. Hopefully that will be a thing of the past at some point in the foreseeable future. But in relation to teachers who administer corporal punishment in conflict with the legislation, obviously the Royal Barbados Police Force would also have to act quickly to remove any weapons from the institution and to carry out its investigation. I believe that the intervention by the police is something that, again, we have to work in conjunction with the Ministry of Education, and I would hope that going forward that would be high on the agenda in terms of not having certainly police intervening as a first resort, as you said correctly, that principals are moving in that direction to involve you, but I think that if you don't already have that engagement, I would hope that plans are on the table for us to engage at some point in relation to the police being a measure of last resort in dealing with issues of violence, and certainly for you to be able to have a relationship with the institutions where you can move in quickly to be able to collect any offending weapons as well. So I would hope that that would be certainly high priority going forward.
Certainly, where real weapons are involved, we do intervene as early as possible. We also have the view that wherever possible, these matters should not engage necessarily the law courts, that the other remedies should be tried. We find from time to time that some schools, they resort to, as soon as there's serious degree of violence, to making a police issue, when in some cases it's clear that some other intervention can take place. But it is not, we try wherever possible to ensure that we don't necessarily put children before the law courts unnecessarily.
I just want to add a little 2 cents, not sort of related. I would like to see, in the case of children rape cases, for instance, that I get, there is not that there's any fault to their own. There's a police officer from my side, but a lot of them are male. And I had a case where a 6-year-old was raped. The mother was traumatized, the child obviously was traumatized. And I kept not my office against police orders, but I more or less refused to let them go to a male officer. The other thing was a male doctor. The other thing was there was a single female officer to cover that jurisdiction, and it was like a 3-hour wait before we saw somebody. If it is possible, I know we don't have the money, but to put somebody on the payroll, on the staff, more women to act in those positions. I'll be grateful. Comment?
Yeah. I can agree with you more. It is our policy that we try on every occasion to have females available to deal with with females, whether young or adults. But I'm aware that at times it is a little bit difficult to find a female early to intervene.
Thank you. Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question comes from the constituency of Christchurch West Central, certainly. And I want to thank those wonderful people for giving me the opportunity over the last 9 months to be their mouthpiece. They say it takes 9 months for a baby to born. This baby has certainly born into a new, exciting and transformative, certainly complete way of doing estimates that will ensure that there is a measure of accountability. And I want to thank the Honourable Prime Minister, the Member of Parliament, for St. Michael, certainly St. Michael Northeast, for allowing me this opportunity and certainly allowing a new way of estimates in this country. My question, Attorney General, sir, years ago we had, when there was a spike in crime, something called a gun amnesty. I don't know what are the benefits, the risks, but there was a gun amnesty, and I want to know if there's any plans to have this policy implemented in the future with this upsurge in crime and violence due to guns and the activities of guns. Gun amnesty.
In relation to gun amnesty, we have not taken it off the table, but at this point in time, I think our approach is an aggressive one to taking the guns off the streets, and I think we would be a little bit hesitant at this time to do so.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. George North.
Thank you. My question has to do to the AGs. It is, and this is something that just came into me. Many of my people in St. George believe that you cannot do very much about gangs and the murders that are happening in recent times, despite your best effort. But people believe that there are too many people out on bail. For example, in 2016, there were 340 persons applied. 2017, 360. So the average for the last 4 years, about 300 persons that apply for bail. Now, these figures here suggest that out of this, I believe most of them people get bail because you have been given persons who commit murder or they are accused of murder bail. And there are many persons who will not want to come forward because they believe that too many people, that your office or the court is very soft on persons coming out on bail. And most of these persons who come out of bail usually go back and commit crime all over again. I want to find out if it is possible for us to know how many people are out on bail, when they're out of bail and can't be found, are these assets being taken up? And if so, can you tell this House how many assets have been taken up when you cannot find those persons on bail? And if you are planning to look at protection for a witness in the future?
I'll ask Mrs. Willoughby from the Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit to speak to the matter of statistics. And then I'll ask the Commissioner to consider the issue of people who are absconding or just not showing up. And then I can respond in respect of your last query.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Criminal Justice Research and Planning Unit looked at bail that was granted in Barbados between the period 2011 and 2017. there were approximately 3,000 bail applications examined, and out of that, only 6% of those persons that applied for bail were granted bail in the High Court. Approximately 3,000, 2,967.
Just go closer and repeat it.
Out of 2,957 bail applications, only 6% were for murder that were granted bail within the High Court.
And what percentage of that got bail? What percentage of the 6%?
6%.
Okay, 6% were murders.
Yes.
And out of that, how many persons actually got bail?
6% got bail.
Well, 6% of persons were murders.
They were granted bail of that.
Only 6% of that.
Of persons that committed murder, that were charged for murder.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Honorable member for St. James. Go ahead.
I will also ask the AG if there's any proposal for protection for witness legislation, because there are many persons will not come forward. In fact, I know of several persons who have decided that they will leave the country because they are fear and they are not coming forward as witnesses. I want to know if your ministry is planning protection of witness legislation.
This is a matter that is obviously dealt with on a case-by-case basis. I can tell you that for the longest time, and this is important given the relative sizes of our countries, we have been discussing at the Attorney General level a regional approach to witness protection. There are some instances where, for some territories, and I can't say which ones, important witnesses have been moved to other jurisdictions within the region. It is obvious that where an individual fears for his life, that it's a matter to be considered. But however we do it, it has to be a regional approach, because there's no point moving somebody from Bank Hall to Six Roads. So it is a matter that we are looking at a regional level to try to set up a framework that will work, because obviously to move a person from Barbados to another jurisdiction, you have to deal with not just immigration issues, but how will that person work and survive and so on. So it's really not a straightforward issue, and it is one that we will need to adopt a regional approach at. The other question was to do with whether there were people absconding.
Right, the assets of those persons who will have got bail but not returned to court. And what are you doing about it?
Doing about the people who don't
come back to court. Those who are, yes.
The incidence is, I would not say very high, but there are cases where people...
You said they are high? Is a high incidence?
No, I would say not very high. But there are cases where people have not been adhering to bail conditions, and they are not turning up, for example, at police stations as stipulated, and we seek them out when that happens, and on some occasions we take them back to the court.
Member for St. James North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And my intervention at this time relates to the administration of justice and the issue of the death penalty. Of course, you know, this society, like every other society, I believe, in a Western democracy is divided on the issue of the efficacy of the death penalty. There's strong feelings on both sides as to whether it is a deterrent and punishment fit for the crime, etc. But the reality is that we are a country of laws, and we have been known, certainly since independence, as a sovereign country that abides by the rule of the law. And the Caribbean Court of Justice, which of course for the last few years has been our highest court of appeal, has decreed that the mandatory death sentence, which we had inherited as a savings clause in our independence constitution from because it was a pre-existing law before independence, the Caribbean Court of Justice has decreed that the mandatory death sentence is unconstitutional. And we, as a law-abiding country, citizens, need to carry out and enforce and apply, rather, that Caribbean Court of Justice decision. 4 or 5 months ago, Honorable Attorney General, as you fully know, you piloted a bill in this Parliament, in this lower chambers, to effect the decision of the Caribbean Court of Justice on this particular issue. The effect of the whole situation is that the courts of Barbados are apparently not trying any new cases where the issue is a charge of murder, and where therefore a guilty plea could be found, because if that is the case, you know, the Caribbean Court has said that you can't execute the death penalty as a mandatory effect, and therefore it is in fact incumbent on this Parliament, the lower house, and the Senate chambers to try to bring into force the Caribbean Court of Justice's rule. That hasn't been able to be done, though, as of now, and I was just wondering, sir, if you could enlighten for the public good where we're at with this situation, especially with the concern of, you know, the situation in Barbados as it abides at the present time.
Thank you, Member for St. James North. I think it is fresh in the memories of parliamentarians that one of the elements of that suite of legislation to transform our death penalty arrangements was defeated in the Senate. That particular element had to do with the amendment to the Constitution, which dealt with consequential matters in relation to if the penalty of death is imposed. The suite of legislation is exactly that. Each one is connected in order for what we're doing to have full force and effect. That particular legislation we expect to return to the Parliament. We've had a number of consultations with independent senators, both formally and informally, and I hope that we've been able to satisfy them as to the steps that we've taken to protect the rights of accused. In matters of this kind, there's always a balancing act. How do we achieve the protection of the rights of the accused individual while satisfying and securing the needs of a judicial system that is responsive and that works? Unfortunately, we hit that particular impasse last year, but as I said, we've had consultations, and I'm hopeful that when it is reintroduced into this chamber and into the upper house, it will, those particular amendments will pass. The matter of the particular murder trials, I can say that the judges have set murder cases down for mention so as to be able to set dates. So the system has not entirely grown to a halt, but setting the matter down for a mention to set a date is to try to establish a date in the future for the commencement of the trial, and therefore both chambers will have to work with some dispatch to try to get the constitutional amendment passed.
Okay. And just one follow-up, Chair, relating to the court system still, and following on from the question asked by the Honourable Member for Christchurch East in terms of the decisions, the length of time taken in a lot of cases, not every case and not by every judge, as I have said before, but in a lot of cases for judges to render decisions, and this is of concern to the public. Of course, we are grateful to the response to that Honourable Member by the Registrar of the Supreme Court, but still, practically speaking, we have a problem and a challenge whereby there are cases, there are judges where 5 years have gone, 6 in some cases the judges died and gone long, and no decision rendered, and this is not fair to the public who have invested a lot of time in a court case, who have retained and paid attorneys at law, who are awaiting the fruits of their efforts one way or another, and the results of the court cases. And we as a Parliament, of course, have committed to make what I believe was a code of conduct effected by the former Chief Justice of Barbados and renowned and illustrious member of this Parliament, former Attorney General Sir David Simmons, a code of conduct that decisions had to be given within 9 months, I believe it was. But in spite of that, there are judges that don't comply, and I believe we have committed as a Parliament to bring in legislation mandating that judges give a decision within 6 months of the end of a case. And I'm just wondering, Attorney General, if you could enlighten the public as to this whole issue and when perhaps this piece of legislation may come into force.
Thank you, Member for St. James North. Delay in giving decisions, we've already touched on it earlier today. I will concede that there's probably no jurisdiction in the world where there isn't some kind of delay attended with court decisions, whether it is Jamaica, Trinidad, Bahamas. We've had a number of territories that have responded to that by increasing the number of judges. In Trinidad, I think they doubled the number of high court judges to be able to deal with their backlog and to take some workload off of the other judges and see decisions speeded up. A similar doubling took place in the Bahamas. Other jurisdictions have taken different approaches. We are perhaps doing an amalgam of both. We are increasing significantly the number of judges, high court judges, from 8 to 13. But in addition to that, though, we feel that judges have to be accountable for what they do as well as for what they don't do. And therefore, with the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel at this point is an amendment to the Constitution to provide that in addition to the other bases for removing a judge from office, we will now have a further ground, and that ground would be that the judge delays the giving of his decision by a period of 6 months. So this is a vexed issue. The Republic of Guyana has amended their constitution to provide that delay in giving a decision is a ground for removal of a judge. In a recent case in Belize, the Belize, the CCJ has spoken about possible grounds for disciplining of judicial officers, and delay in delivery of decisions was mentioned amongst them. We feel that enough things have been done to try to secure the judges' compliance with what they have already committed to. As it stands now, the Judicial Code of Conduct requires you to deliver a decision within, I think, within 8 months. So every judge in Barbados has signed on to this Code of Conduct. He will give his decision within 8 months. The Caribbean Court of Justice has spoken in fairly acid terms about the delays that are attended with our judicial system. It is one of the things that causes us great embarrassment. It is one of the things also that causes investment to be locked up and causes resources to be locked up. So I think that the time has come when we have to say to the judges that they too will be held accountable on the ground of delay in the delivery of judgments. Now, it doesn't mean that as long as a judge reaches 6 months, that an application will be made to have the person removed from his or her office on the bench. But the fact is, if a judge is already committed to a particular point in time by which they will deliver a decision, then there's no reason why under our Constitution we can't hold their feet to the fire. This matter of delay in delivering judgments is one that if we can reverse it and have a system of effective delivery of justice, our society will benefit, our economy will benefit. The Caribbean Court of Justice has opined quite soundly that a speedy delivery of decisions has a net benefit to the economy because it serves to wake up and release assets that are otherwise tied up in the judicial system. I don't expect that this will be a popular measure among our bench, but I think that for many years now we've been trying to tackle the issue. The bar has been providing to the bench almost, well, I shouldn't say monthly, but periodically lists of decisions that are outstanding from High Court judges. And some of these decisions date back years, and no decision in sight. And the member for St. James North is quite correct. Some judges have retired with judges still outstanding. There's currently a retired judge of the High Court, and he has a judgment outstanding from within the first 6 months of him becoming a judge. And he's served his years and retired, and the judgment is still outstanding. What does that do to the parties' rights? They can't do over the trial. 20 years have passed now. Nobody can remember the evidence, even if they could find it. So it is something that we didn't do lightly, but it is a course that I believe we have to do. The people of Barbados are demanding a better service from the judiciary in terms of the delivery of decisions. Now, where judges without good cause delay giving a decision, they have to accept that the system could move against them to remove them from judicial office. One of the fundamental duties of a judge is to sit. And that's a legal concept that has nothing to do with furniture. It means that a judge has a solemn duty to the litigants to hear the case and to decide it with all possible dispatch. And to hear the case and not to give a decision is effectively not to sit.
Member for Christchurch East.
Madam Chair, through you. AG, there's a situation in the High Court where persons are granted bail in the High Court, and the judge examines their sureties, accepts the sureties, but yet the paperwork in relation to the verification of sureties sometimes is held up for weeks. I mean, people, after having been granted bail by the judge and the sureties approved by the judge, are sometimes in dodge for weeks, if not months,
before the paperwork is finished from the registry. Now, why this is startling is that if you get bail in the magistrate's court and the magistrate approves you or approves your surety, you go home the same day. Once the surety concerned, you go home the exact same day. Why is it that the bail in the High Court and the procedures for bail in the High Court actually operate to the disadvantage of the accused person? And what is being done to deal with that? That's a complaint we've had from lawyers up and down, over and over and over. I just want to know what is being done within the registry, or at whose foot does that decision or responsibility lay?
Thank you, Minister. I've asked the Registrar of the Supreme Court to weigh in on this.
Yes, Minister, I recognize that in the Magistrate Court, bail is granted faster than it is in the High Court. In the High Court, we require to actually see your documentation. In the Magistrate Court, as you know, they don't ask for anything. They accept what you say on oath, that you own a house, own a car, own furniture. But in the High Court procedure, where matters are more serious, in context, we require to actually see the conveyance, to see whether you own it, the insurance for the house, and so on, to examine it, and have a caution put on it at the land registry. So the process is a bit longer in the High Court, I do agree with you on that, because we actually examine and make sure that we connect with the relevant agencies, land registry, the bank, if it's money to be frozen, and so on, to have that bail secured properly. And it does take time. There are quite a lot of applications for bail before us, and we have other duties besides looking at bail. My deputy and myself, we deal with the bail. Primarily, she does it. My job is so expansive to do so many things. But it does take longer in the High Court. We recognize that because we're actually examining all the documents that come in before us, and that process is long. It is not intentionally denied by their freedom. That is not the intent, but we have to examine and liaise with the land registry, the bank, insurance company, before we can sign off on it.
In the magistrate's courts, sometimes they ask for the same title deeds and sometimes they ask for the exact same documents. The bottom line with this is that we have to bear in at all times the rights to the freedom of the individual. And if it is a system, if it is a situation where there is an anomaly between the magistrate's court and the High Court in terms of the procedure or the timing, if the person has been granted bail and the surety produces the documents, then we need to be looking at a system whereby you hold those documents and deal with what you need to deal with afterwards while the person goes home. It is just something, Madam Registrar and AG, that I hope that together you can look at so that people who have been deemed suitable candidates for bail by a judge and had their sureties approved are not subjected to being indulged for more time than they need to be. We need to look at what can we do on the back end that still allows the person to go home on the day that they're granted bail.
I'm not sure, Honorable Minister, whether it makes sense to get the papers, have them check them, give them bail to come back, when we actually check them to go home. I think the procedure is as it is, seems more logical to do it that way. But AG has actually met with us and the defense criminal lawyers to discuss such matters, so we're in discussions about this topic.
Member for St. Thomas.
I want to find out, I recognize that there is a $1.8 million for community aid in this estimate, and I want to find out if the clients are being served well. I want to find out if the clients are being served well. I know that there are hundreds of people. I don't know, my colleagues, I believe they have persons who come to them. They have complaints that the cases have been going on so long. They've been using the community legal aid system, and some lawyers are dilly-dallying, not adequately fulfilling their roles to help them to bring the measures to closure. And I want to know what plans are being put in place to be able to mitigate these kinds of challenges that they are identifying, that they are experiencing, Some of them say the money is too slight, and therefore it does not pay them to go to it according to what the clients are saying. I would like to know what better could be done if that is the case for poor people who have to rely on the system to be able to have justice meted out to them.
I allow the Director of Community Legal Services to comment, but let me just say that the system has been beset with a number of challenges in recent years, and steps have been taken to address those. In many cases, the fees that are to be paid are not, or traditionally have not been paid in a timely fashion. There have been instances where attorneys who have represented litigants under the scheme have had to wait years to get paid. And it therefore meant, I know of some instances where lawyers and law firms have taken the decision not to participate in the scheme going forward, and that's not for the benefit of Barbados and Barbadians. The concept of working pro bono publico is one that is well known to legal systems and to legal practitioners across the world, and it isn't a desirable thing that individuals, even though it's only a small amount of money, should work and then have to wait until years pass before they can get a check. There are a number of things that are being put in place to deal with this, and perhaps the most important one has to do with the government's stance on the accumulation, on no longer accumulating arrears. When you do not pay lawyers timely, there's no incentive to get the work done. That is a tragedy. It's unfortunate. The only people who suffer are the litigants, and sometimes it is downright unacceptable. If you've taken the brief, do it and do it swiftly. But the reality that the system faces is that when people know they're not going to get paid in any hurry, they just, as you said, they dilly-dally with the assignment. So by determining that we will no longer be accumulating arrears, the Community Legal Service Department Board has accepted the recommendation that invoices for all work must be submitted within, is it 21 days? 15, no. Within 28 days of the completion of the work, and that those fees will be paid within 28 days of the submission of the invoice. So, in a sense, our financial strictures, which have put obligations on us not to carry arrears, represents the solution to this problem. So lawyers are encouraged to complete the assignment, send their invoice in within 28 days with the guarantee that they will be paid within 28 days, as opposed to what has been happening in recent years, where financial year after financial year would pass, and you hope that you will get a few cents from the legal aid department. Director?
Thank you, AG. Just to add to what the Attorney General has said, the department issues on average 1,000 legal aid certificates annually, and of those we don't have more than 30% complete, but that is still a lot, because we're dealing, although it is a professional relationship, we're still dealing with personalities, and not all personalities will mesh. Where we do have complaints, however, we try to engage on a one-on-one basis with the view, first of all, of mending the relationship so that they can continue and they don't have to pay more than one attorney for each matter, because that is an obvious cost to the department. And where possible, to encourage attorneys to do their professional best to satisfy the needs of their clients. However, we would have been discussing here, and you would recognize that there are so many limitations that affect that, the whole court system and the concomitant delays and so on. But we do our best to work it out as quickly as possible.
My next question is associated with the registration department. I have been there a couple times last year, and I became the most frustrated woman you could ever imagine. The workers I saw did excellent work, to be able to accommodate the large numbers of people coming into that department. So I must commend them. And they're working under trying situations. I'm asking the question because I'm seeing it happening and I want to know if that is a requirement. When mothers with young babies, newly born, have to take them into that environment, there's air condition. Everybody in there is not as tidy as you would expect, so there are going to be orders in that air-conditioned environment. And to carry young babies in there who are susceptible to any and everything, I had a challenge with that, because if I have a young baby, if I don't have a baby at all, I can borrow somebody's one and carry it down. I carry it in the registration department. I have 2 babies in my eyes. Carry it to the registration department, I can say it's my baby. And I'm not understanding it from the point of view of health reasons. And secondly, the biggest problem of all is that there are no washroom facilities in that block. And I want to find out if there will be any measures put in place now that there is rehabilitative work happening there to facilitate the public, because you're talking hundreds of people every day. And if you have a nature call, ma'am, you have to come up through the main door, go around to the front, go through security again, go up some steps. By the time you finish that nature call, exposed for the nation to take a picture or carry commentary on it. So I want to know, is there a plan going forward for facilities to be put in place to accommodate males and females, even if it's a single cubicle each? But for people who are disabled, and so it is very, very difficult for them to be able to access bathroom facilities. And the whole of Ishtown is that anyhow no toilet. I would like to know if there are plans in these estimates to be able to address that very serious matter.
Honourable Member, I agree with you when we talk of the babies coming to the registration department. Yes. That is not a need. We put an ad in the paper for it and said, do not bring the babies. I agree with you about that. Yeah. We don't want to see the baby. The green card, the green book is enough for us to decide whether a child is alive or born or not. In respect of the toilet facilities, that has been done. In return, yes,
bless you, Jesus.
Toilets for the public when we go back. Yeah.
Good. And like my final comment is, sorry, beg your pardon, sir.
Installed in this last set of work that has been done.
I had a nature call, that's how I knew. And I'm only human, and all the other persons are. Thank you, sir. The other final comment is to do with the schools. It's not quite associated in the order that you've given me, ma'am, but at the last minute of my seniority and age, I think you would give me that privilege, right, ma'am? Good. I am very proud of it. 1 year older on Friday. And I spent it here till midnight. Ma'am, I want to make a comment. I'm not so sure if one of my colleagues would raise it, but it is a matter that has me extremely gravely concerned, in that this whole national discussion on medicinal marijuana and decriminalization and so is very, very important at this time as well. But I have my difficulties in understanding what is happening with our youth, especially our primary and secondary schools, perhaps nursery as well, because some parents are so irresponsible and they are pushing the cigarettes in the children's mouths and doing all kinds of strange things with the marijuana. And the marijuana, therefore, is easier, freer, and access is earlier than we plan for our children. So is alcohol. I want to find out, ma'am, what the DARE program is doing, if it is still in existence, in the very new way, because I know they will say I'm old-time-ish, I don't mind. I accept that, because that is a reality. I want to know what's happening in our schools. I know that the community policing police officers were the ones who engaged. Of course, I believe the Youth Affairs Department did it in collaboration with them. I want to find out what is happening now that we know the easier access of drugs. And almost every other household now, children are telling you, I was smoking it last night, from the time I was 4. Others are saying, my father gave it to me, my mother gave it to me, I got to school and push it. I want to find out what educational programs are happening, if any, in our schools, and recommend that, if not, it be again attended to as a matter of urgency, because it is destroying the fabric of our youth that will make that future where we will want police officers, judges, lawyers, whatever, teachers, politicians. I want to know, ma'am, what is happening in this current situation, because to get information about Barbados now, you have to be perhaps the Attorney General, because I don't get any. So I just want in this forum, please, to get to hear what is happening.
Please allow the Commissioner to respond.
Yes, Madam Chair. The DARE program is still very active in many of our schools. Unfortunately, over the years, we have not really done any study to really see what results we've gotten from the program as such, but it is still very active in most of our schools, primary schools.
Sir? Primary schools?
And secondary as well.
And secondary. Most are not all.
Not all.
But I tell you, there's a terrible situation. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Mr. Michael North? What are we looking at? Sorry, Mr. Michael East.
East. You always north?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Barbados is a very funny society, and people talk things every day, and when the opportunity comes, nobody wants to talk about them. In this society, there are people of a certain social ilk who escape being charged when the entire society believes that they're involved in criminal activities. Some end up getting a little tap on the wrist and being freed, even in cases where they are felonious nature, including murder in Barbados. And many people know what I'm talking about. If I really cite one case, and unfortunately can't call names, but children of the working class in this society, when they're incarcerated for even minor crimes, the damage to their persona sometimes seems to remain permanent. The society condemns them for life. They're not being allowed or embraced by the society because they don't belong to the social relationships that allow them to be able to abuse and escape the stigmatization. I personally believe the state has a responsibility to help to remove these guys from ordinary working class persons who had to face incarceration, and that we need to put mechanisms in place, contemporary mechanisms in place, to help to facilitate these people in a reintegration process. I believe in a modern society, especially in a small state, the individuals who don't have those opportunities in life find themselves totally alienated even from the labor market. They have to accept what kind of jobs are available to them, and as I know it was indicated here today already, at one time MTW and NCC would take those people. Nowadays, it is very difficult for these people to get a job, and the system is not so structured that some people call it a halfway house or some kind of midway unit. When these people are then the ex-con, when the ex-con now, so to speak, I don't like to use it, but I think that's the only way I can express it here now. When the ex-con comes out from the prison, we don't have any mechanism. These people come out on the street, their families don't want to see them. Even if they let them in the house for 2 days or a day, as soon as they miss something, that is the person that commit the crime. They can't get a job anywhere. I think that, and I'm asking if we do not think for once that we need to have a mechanism in place so that we can facilitate these people in going through a transition so that they can be reintegrated into the system again.
Thank you. If the minister responsible for Home Affairs has an opportunity to participate, he will hopefully be able to add to some of what I'm going to say. there are two elements to this. One is to make a determination as to what kind of sentence is appropriate, and then the other is what happens when that individual comes back out. In our Penal System Reform Act, we attempted to establish a statutory basis for a variety of forms of punishment, so that in many cases an individual is not simply consigned to prison after being found guilty. I think you would agree that if an individual could be adequately punished by way of other kinds of orders, then the stigma of having gone up dodge, as they say, would be eliminated in many respects. He would still have a conviction, but the stigma that is attended with having gone to prison, you can try to avoid that. And the Penal System Reform Act attempted to be able to give a court options rather than custodial sentences. On the way back out, if a person is given a custodial sentence, we do have the opportunity, though it is a little limited, to expunge those records. And if an individual benefits from the expungement of the criminal record, then as far as the law is concerned, you know, that conviction is spent, you have served your time, and you no longer have to carry that particular baggage. Our challenge, though, is the challenge of all small societies. An individual who is charged with an offense, truth is, it don't even matter if, and I'm being very candid, it sometimes don't matter if it goes to trial or not. Because as long as you've been charged and there's some picture in the papers on Facebook that John Brown has been charged with X, Y, or Z, the branding starts then. Nobody waits to see if a conviction actually ensues. The moment you are held by the police and charged, people begin to treat you like a criminal. It is almost as if while we accept the fact that a person is innocent until proven guilty, we operate preferably on the basis that a person stops being innocent the moment they get arrested. That is obviously inconsistent with what a modern, reasonable society would accept as a way of dealing with individuals. The rehabilitation of individuals who have offended is something that is vitally important to Barbados, to any society. It is vitally important simply because if an individual has no options when he or she leaves prison, then nature abhors a vacuum. So you will go back, even if you didn't do it before. You will now be oriented to it simply because there is no job available to you. There was a wonderful thing when the Ministry of Public Works years ago decided that they were not going to insist on police certificates of character in order to be able to hire general workers, because it meant that a large number of individuals could actually get a job notwithstanding that they had a criminal record and try to make something of themselves. I don't know if many of those individuals are still taken on by the Ministry of Public Works, but we do have an obligation to all individuals, so as long as they have paid their debt to society, then we should make sure that we treat them. I mean, if you pay a debt, you don't owe any more. So if you don't owe any more, then there's no reason why you should have to carry the stigma of being a debtor. But in our society, again, as long as you went to prison, you know, you're a jailbird. These are matters that will require a fair amount of sensitivity. The business community has to become involved, because unless individuals are going to be given an opportunity to earn a decent living, then that individual is going to be consigned forever to be operating below the acceptable level in our society. Now, how do you get a reasonable living? That then has to do with what we do with the individuals when they're incarcerated. There have been a number of individuals incarcerated adults who have come up with CXCs. No, I regret that I can't say what has happened to them.
I have a few seconds to wrap up your answer. You're strapped for time.
Oh, okay. But I agree with the minister that we have to take the matter of rehabilitation seriously. If we spend vast resources on indicting people, on investigating crime, but we don't tackle effectively what happens when they come out at the other end of the pipeline, we will realize that end of the pipeline goes right back around to the beginning and they start all over again.
Thank you.
But just a follow-up question. I believe that we cannot ignore, we're trying to build modern sovereignties in the region. And one of the things that I'm very concerned about is the full adaptation to Commonwealth or British jurisprudence, and judges and magistrates have no understanding of Caribbean jurisprudence. I'm also very concerned with state administration not understanding properly the sociology of the Caribbean itself. And what they keep doing over and over is planting structures and institutions on metropolitan structures and institutions on small states within the Caribbean, and then we end up with some of the challenges that we face through it. Right now we are isolating from mainstream hundreds and thousands of young men and young women because of not understanding the complexities of these challenges. And if we do not make contact with it, trust me, it will be disorder, it will be deviance, and it will be severe crimes in perpetuity. Because at the end of the day, if we have no understanding of the very societies that we're trying to cultivate, then we can lose control of the society itself. And that is my view, and I would like people at least to take some consideration of some of the things I'm suggesting to them. It's not meant to be a question, but you can.
Well, this is not meant to be a question. There's no answer to be given, but let me just say that the search for Caribbean jurisprudence is not one that is easily disregarded. For decades now, Caribbean lawyers have grappled with the notion that a lot of what we have inherited as common law and as UK law, especially in a lot of criminal cases, is inconsistent with how we think and behave. Even something as simple as provocation. The concept of provocation for an Englishman, every West Indian student of law recognized that would be very different. We used to have a running argument about what could provoke a West Indian man or woman. And invariably, one of the things that was offered was tell a man about his mother. Now, in England, a whole different phenomena would result. But in the context of the Caribbean, you could where many, you know, what is that book? My Mother Who Fathered Me. Where our societies are based on a matriarchal structure, you could perhaps create no bigger offense than to tell a man about his mother. But our law, as applied, couldn't accept that something like that could be provocation. Our CCJ, one of the informing statements in its statute establishing it is the importance of finding a Caribbean jurisprudence, and it is not something that we will discover overnight, but like the common law, it will take time to build up. But I look forward to an era of new judicial thinking that will see our culture reflected in our laws. But we've been there before. Our Family Law Act that takes into account a union other than marriage was novel at the time when it was passed, but it recognized in law that the lives of Barbadians as they lived it, required recognition and sanction in law. And we began that journey then, and it's a journey that I'd like to think that we've stayed true to.
Thank you. Sir, we need to move on. Final question and answer before you wrap up. Honorable Member for St. Michael Northwest.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is directed to the Director of National Task Force and Crime Prevention. The Director mentioned earlier, she outlined a number of applications before the court, bail applications, and she also outlined the percentage of persons that received bail, which was 6% from murder, right? My question is, what is the percentage for drugs and the percentage for guns in terms of bail applications? And is the percentage higher for guns, for drugs, or the murder percentage is higher?
At the Supreme Court, with most applications for this specific offense being granted bail at 74%. For firearm offenses at the Supreme Court, the initial application, 49% of the persons were granted bail. After that initial application, then we saw a related 63% of persons granted bail, and that was specific for firearm offenses. For murder, manslaughter, as I said before, it was 6% of persons who were granted bail, and this was after many applications for bail, as well as for other offenses such as violence. We saw 17% of persons who applied for bail being granted bail, and for burglary, 8% of those persons were granted bail. Firearm offenses remain relatively high for both of those persons who were granted bail, where we saw 43% of persons with firearm offenses being granted bail and 23% were denied bail.
Thank you. Honorable Attorney General, you may do your wrap-up, and please ask for the head to stand part.
Let me begin, though, by thanking publicly all the members of my staff who have contributed to this particular exercise. I regret that we didn't have to rely on the vast experience of all of them, but perhaps we'll save that for next year. We'll do the others who didn't get a chance to participate on this occasion. But I thank them most graciously for their support and also for assisting me in preparing for this exercise, which could otherwise have proven to be a challenge. I also want to thank members of the Chamber for their patience. I thank them for their interest in the area of law and order, and I thank them for recognizing, perhaps most importantly, that this area is one where everything is connected. The challenges that we face are great, but let me exhort all Barbadians to recognize that this is not an us and them phenomenon. You know, when an individual loses his life in a city community or in a so-called hotspot, there's almost a feeling of, well, sorry to hear, but that's where they live. Sorry to hear, but he was probably a bad man. If somebody, on the other hand, loses their life in Prior Park, or loses their life in West Terrace, or someplace else, then Fort George, many of those other places, then a society begins to lament. The loss of human life should not, a reaction to the loss of human life should not depend on your socioeconomic circumstances. It shouldn't depend on who your mother is or your father is. And I think that I heard some of this coming out in the contributions from the chamber, from Leader of the Opposition and other members. The same, you know, the rain falls on the just and on the unjust. And, and it therefore means that whatever confronts us as a society confronts all of us. We all have a stake in ensuring that our society is safe, that our society is orderly, that our society is respectful of each other's rights. And the only way that we're really going to wrestle the demon of criminal activity to the ground is if we all put our shoulder to the wheel. Today's focus perhaps has been on murders. Perhaps it has been on gun-related homicides. Some years ago it might have been on burglary. The fact is that crime, however it presents itself, is still a blot on our society. The police will get called in at the end, after it has happened. But nobody turns into a criminal overnight. Every single criminal in Barbados at one point in time was a newborn baby, was a good Sunday school boy or girl, was a student at a school like Combomay or Parkinson full of promise. But somewhere along the way, it is likely that our society will have failed them. And therefore, it is incumbent on all of us. Taxpayers are not, whatever you designate yourself to be, it is incumbent on you to join us in this fight against not just gun-related homicides, but against all homicides, against all burglaries, against all forms of criminal activity, as we try and restore Barbados to the bright future that we feel it can have. I beg to move that this head stamp part.
The question is that head 30 in the amount of 70,291,726 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All honorable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it. Certainly.
We're going to end now, but if y'all want to slip in, that's all right.
To move that you do not leave the chair and report progress to His Honor the Speaker, and do request leave to sit again.
Anybody's a second? Question is that I do not leave the chair and report to the Honorable Speaker progress and ask for leave to sit again. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All honorable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of committee has reported progress and humbly requests leave to sit again.
move from the 5 days to the 40 days. From 5 days to 40 hours. The committal of government notices.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move a resolution to amend the standing orders 65, 66, 67 of the standing orders of the Honorable House of Assembly.
He said no, so I think it's mean don't.
Order number 16. You're back up. Government business.
Government business, the order we did.
In the name of the Honorable Attorney General, to move the passing of a resolution to amend standing orders 65, 66, 67 of the standing orders of the Honorable House of Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, I know that for the third time perhaps in a number of weeks we are revisiting the issue of the standing order. And while it may come as a source of amusement for some and frustration for others, the fact is that this is a new direction for us, and as we have gone through the process, we recognize areas that need to be changed and some that need to be fine-tuned. And Parliament must never lack the courage to amend its rules of procedure so as to fully give effect to the wishes of the Parliament. So, Mr. Speaker, the amendments that I'm proposing today are few, but one of them that immediately comes to mind is the fact that the standing orders as they currently stand say that the debate on the estimates will last 5 days or 40 hours. Mr. Speaker, we are now at the end of our 5th day, but we have not yet completed our 40 hours. What is the mischief that Parliament is trying to get at? The mischief that Parliament is trying to get at, sir, has to do with fully ventilating the financial and budgetary arrangements of the government. And therefore, for that to be fully achieved, we have to give the process as much time as possible to allow that. So do we accept a 5-day limitation, in which case we would end today, but we still have a number of hours left available to us, and there are 1 or 2 other ministries that are very important in terms of our national development agenda. So it makes sense for us to remove the impediment of 5 days and stipulate that it should run for 40 hours. We also wish to provide that in each day the examination of the estimates would not exceed 8 hours. That doesn't mean that you can't go on and do something else so that we could be here until midnight again. But obviously, perhaps it may look as though I am begging for mercy for myself, having taken up all of the days sitting. We will, the other amendment, sir, that's an amendment to 66.1. The 67.2 has been amended by reordering part of that, what was that clause, and putting it into 66.1. The other matter has to do with having parliamentary secretaries in the chamber. We have a number of parliamentary secretaries over the years who have served this country from being in the other place, and it is also possible to have parliamentary secretaries from this chamber, and therefore we also want to make provision for the sending for parliamentary secretaries if in the other place. And those are the amendments, sir, that we wish to propose. They've been circulated to the members of the committee.
Honorable member, did you speak to 67.2? Honorable member, did you speak to 67.2?
67.2?
Yes, please. Yes, Honorable.
67.2 is just a truncation of what the original 67.2 was. The original 67.2 would have said the Standing Finance Committee shall consider no fewer than 6 heads, and that this examination shall take place.
So you've deleted that? If I'm really correct, you've deleted?
We're not deleting all of it. We're just keeping the opening part of it.
Right.
So the reference to 5 days that was in
40 hours.
66-1 was then expanded in 67-2 to say 5 days or 40 hours.
Just for clarification,
right. So we're clearing that up,
right.
And therefore all that is left of 67-2 will be the opening 8 or 9 words saying that the Standing Finance Committee shall consider no fewer.
The chair just wanted clarification. I sought clarification, sir. Just wanted clarification on it.
There is a further proposal that we amend 6711C, so that the Prime Minister or Minister of Finance should be permitted to intervene on any head for the purpose of clarification or further explanation for a period not exceeding 10 minutes. I believe that today showed a good example of why that might be required, because there were some matters in the estimates that were within the peculiar knowledge of the Ministry of Finance, and I think the Chamber benefited greatly from having that exposition on that area. The other matter is one which is consequential of the early amendments. At the end of the entire process, we want, at the end of the 40 hours, for all of the heads to be put to the Chamber so that they can be voted on. And those are the extent of the amendments proposed. I beg to move, sir, that the resolution to amend the standing orders as circulated and shown on the version dated 4th of March 2019 be approved.
I beg to second it.
Honorable Sir Michael West.
Mr. Speaker, these amendments are coming fast and frequently in such a very short time. Essentially 3, as I enumerated them, or as I thought the Honorable Attorney General enumerated them. I have no objection to parliamentary secretaries serving in the other chamber being allowed into the well of Parliament. I have no problem with the extended hours. I speak only with reference to the matter where the Minister of Finance or the Prime Minister is allowed to interject herself into the debate as he or she might desire. Prime Minister plays a very critical role in the life of a parliamentary institution such as ours is. And so I entirely understand that. I have no objection to that. I also entirely understand and could appreciate that the current Prime Minister, being of the gender she is possessed of some serious and significant maternal instincts and is seeking only to protect her chicks. I support it. Mr. Speaker, may I...
Just a word of caution, Honourable Member. Just a word of caution.
Mr. Speaker, I'm seeking clarification from you as to what part of my language causes you concern.
The whole connotation of quote-unquote protecting chicks, just even though it might be colloquialism in Barbados, just be wary, Honourable Member, of the connotation that it can imply. That's what I said. And Honourable Member, it is just a ruling from the chair. It is just a ruling from this chair.
You calling me a chick?
Mr. Speaker, an innocent analogy was used here today. If it is offensive... No. Mr. Speaker, if it is offensive to any member, any honourable member in the House, I take it back. Quite a light-hearted, innocent analogy use.
Honorable Member Senandro, one person is speaking. Please allow him to speak. Please. And you are speaking, you do not have audience in this chamber when you are sitting, sir. You have no audience whilst you are sitting, none at all. I do not see you. The question is that these amendments be adopted. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. The amendments are so adopted.
Come to the end of today's sitting. I beg to move the adjournment of the sitting until tomorrow, suspension until tomorrow at 10 a.m., 5th of March.
The question is that this honorable chair will be suspended until tomorrow, the 5th day of March at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until 10 a.m. promptly on the morrow.